When they approached my office, it was clear that they had problems and were in trouble. People do not come to see me until they are in trouble or have a problem, not because I am so sensitive, intelligent, and aware of their feelings. The name painted on the frosted glass door was faded and peeling. It said, Matthew Steele, Investigating Security Specialist. That is me. Matthew Steele is a St. Louis, Missouri-based investigator and security consultant, and what is typically known as a private investigator. I also operate as a security consultant, sometimes referred to as a bodyguard. I'll do almost anything related to investigations, from background checks to keeping the scum of society off your back and away from your body, to tracking down a suspected cheating spouse and locating runaways. It doesn't matter if it's your wife, husband, child, or enemy. I'll find them for a fee. I'll do almost anything that is legal, though that can be a fine line at times. I will not provide muscle to physically assault someone. If you and a neighbor or business associate are at odds about something, I will not kick their bum for you. I'll find out about their past. If there is anything you can use to keep them under control. But if it's physical payback you want, then go talk to someone else. It was just before lunchtime, and I was sitting back in my chair, feet on the desk, thinking about the international situation when the guy and woman entered. Actually, I'd almost been asleep, taking my feet off the desk and putting them back on the floor. I sat up and waited for one of them to speak. "Mr. Steele?" the man asked. I nodded and he continued, "I'm Jason Worth. This is my wife, Susan, and I need your help." He sat down without being asked and without waiting for his wife. Jason Worth was about 55 or so. His style, thinning hair smooth, features the spray on suntan, and his very expensive clothes should have taken years off his appearance, but didn't. He was 6'1", muscular build, probably from a gym, and had an air of entitlement. Worth had an attitude that only a lot of money could bring, and it surrounded him like a shroud. I immediately took a dislike to him. Susan Worth is the kind of woman that shouldn't be permitted to stroll down a crowded street. Her looks would cause men to walk into signposts or wreck their cars because they'd be watching her instead of where they were going or what they were doing. Mrs. Worth couldn't have been more than 35 if I was being cruel. About the same age as me. Tall for a lady at 5'10", she had the type of body and face that could start wars. Hey, it happened back in Troy. It could happen right now. Susan would have made Helen of Troy look like an ugly cousin. She also had a muscular build, but she looked like she did tennis or golf or something. Susan preferred a toned body over runway models rather than going to the gym every day. She had a sexy girl-next-door face, sort of like Kate Hudson, long auburn hair, worn loose down her back and piercing blue eyes. If she would walk across a bar or restaurant, men and some women would follow her with their eyes and thoughts. I watched as she sat down and crossed her legs. I sighed and settled back in my chair. "Keep your focus on business," I told myself. Myself responded saying, "Are you kidding me?" Continuing the discussion with myself, the devil side of me said we would fit well together as I'm 6'3". The devil also claimed that my hard-muscled body weighing 200 pounds would feel good against her. The last thing the devil said before I pushed him out of my mind was that my black hair and gray eyes were just the thing she needed to compliment her. "Get thee behind me, Satan. I've gone into your background a little, and I think you're just the man I need," Worth remarked. I nodded sagely in consideration. I guess my background. Matthew Steele had been a rising star in the St. Louis Police's detective division at one time. I was sure to make captain by the time I was 35. That was 5 years ago. A sad set of circumstances led to my, shall we say, downfall. Or should we say being screwed by the system. My partner and I were on a stakeout, and something I ate didn't agree with me. When you're on a stakeout, you can't be too choosy about food. I should have been more careful. After almost 2 hours of leaping out of the car, going into the nearby alley and throwing up, my partner suggested I go home. Heck with you jumping in and out of the car, we might as well put up a neon sign saying police stakeout on duty, so go home. I walked to the corner approximately 200 feet away, called the station, and requested that a patrol car pick me up and take me home. The 2 patrolmen mocked me in good fun, all the way to my house, thinking back on what happened. It's a good thing they were with me. It's an old story and a cliché, but when I got home, there was a strange car in the driveway. I entered my house with 2 patrolmen following me. The noises coming from down the corridor to the bedroom couldn't be mistaken. Someone or more were getting it on. I headed to the bedroom door, knowing what I'd see before I got there. I was correct. My wife Johanna and a man were having. I think a conjugal visit is as good a way to characterize it as any. What the heck? That was my not very original question. The same question has been asked thousands of times, having seen my share of domestic disputes. Despite my anger, I intended to tell the guy to leave my house. I knew if I started beating on the guy, I might not stop. And that would bring me into danger. I didn't need. I already had a plate full. That was before I recognized my wife's playmate. Her boy toy was my superior at the department. Captain Joe Harper was a brown-nosing, kissing hack who only got his job due to political connections. When I saw him stand up bare in surprise, I lost it. Still, I wouldn't have attacked him if he hadn't gone for his gun lying on the nightstand next to the bed. Guess he was as astonished as me. And his first thought was about self-preservation. I bridged the distance between us before he could grasp his weapon and smacked him so hard. I bet his daddy got a headache. He fell across the bed. I straddled him and started hammering on him. Now I swear I hadn't planned on hitting my wife. I don't hit women. But she jumped between Harper and me. I never knew if she wanted to protect Harper or to stop me from going to jail. Johanna caught a roundhouse right hand and went butt over tea kettle off the bed. It's a good thing the patrolman who had brought me home ran down the hall to the bedroom when he heard me yell. If they hadn't, I might have killed that piece of crap. Harper. They removed me from him before I was found guilty of manslaughter or murder. No one, including my wife, who worked for the local school board and especially Captain Harper, wanted the situation to go public. He did not file charges for assault with purpose and persuaded Johanna not to file a spousal control complaint. However, when the dust cleared, I had lost my job and my wife. I did get to keep the house and most of the money. I complained that it wasn't right or fair, that I would lose my job and Harper would go unpunished. It didn't do any good. I was still terminated for conduct unbecoming or some such BS. Harper didn't get off scot-free. A severe letter of reprimand was put in his file group to do. I assumed Major Taylor, the chief of the detective department, had told me Harper would be demoted to lieutenant, and because of that letter, and the reason behind it would never obtain another promotion. Taylor also stated that Harper would have difficulty interacting with the department's rank and file. Yeah, but the loser still has a job, I said. Where is his punishment? What? Is he lost? I've lost my wife and my job. Heck, I've lost my way of life. It's a poor outcome, Taylor said, but his family has too much political power for the department's higher-ups to do much more. If you need a hand or I can help. Call me Matt. What about my background? I asked. I was still a little defensive about that piece of history. I know you were a competent, perhaps even exceptional police detective. I also understand why you left the department. Worth removed a gold cigarette case from the inside pocket of his very expensive sports coat. Mind if I smoke? He inquired and ignited his cigarette before I responded. Regardless, I moved the ashtray I keep for clients across the desk toward him. I do not smoke, but it is not my responsibility to monitor others' vices or health. You have detective skills and expertise. In addition, share your experiences with your ex-wife. You are an ideal candidate for this position. When he named my ex, I felt I was correct. I dislike this jerk of a son. What is your job, Mr. Worth? My wife, Worth, squirmed in his chair, clearly ashamed and angry, had an affair with one of the hired hands. It was not like that, Jason, Susan complained, but with a sneaky smirk on her face. Worth snapped, Shut up! It was like that. You simply couldn't keep your hands off him, could you? I still cannot believe it. A woman of your class rutting like a pig with a surprised pool boy. Stanley is more than just a pool boy. He's a highly excellent young actor, Susan countered. My pal is a talented actor, Mr. Worth replied. He's had a few little roles and performed at the Muni Opera. And it doesn't matter if he's an actor. You should not have been with him. I did not claim his ability was acting, did I? Susan said with an unpleasant smirk. Darn you, Susan. When this is over, you and I will have to reevaluate our relationship, Mr. Worth pledged. Susan began to respond, but I interrupted sufficiently. I am not interested in hearing you two verbally attack each other. What is your job, Mr. Worth? Just like I said. Susan engaged in an affair with our pool boy. Worth glared at his wife, challenging her to deny it. When I discovered out, I threw him from the property and spread the information so that no one who matters would hire him again. What do you want me to do, Mr. Worth?" Apparently, the teenager did not like the repercussions of his brief encounter with my wife, and he has threatened me. Jason actually means that Stanley is blackmailing him. Susan gave a sultry little grin. At least it appeared sexy to me. He, Stanley. I mean, I informed my husband that he owned a DVD of Stanley and me together. He said he'd make sure it became public. All of our friends, family, and Jason's business associates would receive a copy of Jason. Did not pay him $100,000. "Say nothing," Susan Worth nearly yelled. Looking back at me, he added, "I want you to find him, persuade him to leave me alone, and give you the DVD and any copies he's made. Do anything required to get him to leave us alone." Worth stared at me angrily and said, "Anything that works. Anything at all. Have you contacted the police? Blackmail is a criminal offense, as you're well aware. If I go to the police, I might as well run an ad in the newspaper claiming my wife acted like a 304. Worth angrily responded, gazing at Susan. "That is why I came to you. I've heard that you're incredibly discreet." "From whom?" I asked. "What? Who referred you to me?" "Major Taylor, for one. We met him at various police social events." Worth took a deep breath. "Mr. Steele, I don't understand the question. What difference does it make how we discovered you? The only question is, will you take the job?" I said, "I haven't made a decision yet. Leave your phone number, and I'll call you back tomorrow morning with my response. You may be aware that there are other private investigators. Yes, there is, Mr. Worth. Please feel free to contact any of them. However, if you want me, you will have to wait until tomorrow morning to see if I am available." Worth looked around my office. He noticed the Warren carpet, the walls that needed painting, and the battered desk I was seated behind. "It appears that you cannot afford to be picky about occupations. Appearances are deceptive, Mr. Worth. Furthermore, money isn't everything." I lied. Money was everything. "Okay, almost everything. If you'd like, I can call you tomorrow. If not, it was wonderful to meet you. It is certainly worth saying and standing up. Mr. Steele, I'll await your call tomorrow. Come along." "Susan." Mrs. Worth made a show of crossing her lengthy legs. She stood and extended her hand. "I think I'm going to like working with you, Mr. Steele. I bet you'll have more fun than poor Stanley." "Hopefully not for the same reasons, Mrs. Worth. Goodbye." I called Major Taylor immediately after the Worths left. "Hello, Major. I understand you are sending business my way. I assume you're referring to Jason Worth, Matt. Why do you propose that he contact me about his problem?" "I'm not sure what his problem is." The Major admitted to being somewhat secretive about it. He asked whether I could recommend any pies. I told him I would recommend either you or Raleigh Chambers. He's a spoiled rich guy, and I thought you might make some money off of him. "Thank you, Major. I can't discuss his situation, but I'm going to accept the position. How are you, Matt?" "I'm good. Major, it's been nearly 2 years since the department screwed me, and I created lemonade from those lemons. I like my life. I can work when and for whoever I want, and I don't have any politically connected nonsense telling me what to do. How are you doing financially?" "I have heard about your office in the truck you are driving. Between you and me, Major, the work I'm getting is preparing me well. The vehicle runs well, and I'm not concerned about parking it in some of the places I've had to go. The sole reason I have an office is so that I can meet with clients. Wouldn't having a beautiful office wow your clients more? People assume I'm desperate because of where I live. It makes them believe I'll work harder for their money." "Okay, Matt, please call if I can assist you." "Sure, Major, and thank you." Major Taylor and I did not discuss the settlement I received from the St. Louis Police Department. I had sued for wrongful firing, among other things. My attorney, Jeb Smith, is a former college friend who was very good, really vicious. A great white shark in an ocean of smaller sharks. Jeb was so good that the other sharks fled when he began swimming. It's nice to have friends. It's even better to have buddies who can get you go-to-hell money in a settlement. Go to hell. Money is when you have enough money to tell everyone to go hack. You do not require them for your livelihood. Matt, you really don't have a case. Jeb told me, but he had a shark smile on. I mean, you did beat your boss, which is considered insubordination. No matter the reason. But what? I inquired. But the department is opposed to the matter receiving media attention. It's bad enough when a superior humps the subordinate's wife. But the superior gets off with a slap on the wrist and the husband is fired. That will not go over well with the general public, let alone the rank-and-file police officers. They'll settle for a high six-figure sum. Jeb smiled and added, "And I'll get them to pay my fees, too." Then he laughed hysterically. Jeb did not care much for the establishment. Jeb sent a letter to the police commissioner, Captain Harper, his boss, and their legal department, indicating his intention to file a lawsuit. Then he sat back, waiting for the explosion. It was not long in coming. The police attorney, Judah Dobson, immediately called to schedule a meeting with Jeb and me. When Jeb told me about the meeting, including the time and location, I said, "Judas, that's a fitting name for an attorney." Then, realizing who I was talking to, I apologized and said, "I don't mean you, Jeb." Jeb laughed and opened another drink. "Call me whatever you want, but pay me 30 pieces of silver." He read the request for a meeting again. "We will go meet with Dobson, but this is what I want you to do." We entered Dobson's office and were taken to a spacious conference room. The secretary brought us coffee, then Dobson and 3 other persons entered the room. They were all lawyers. Jeb was outnumbered 4-1, but I was confident in my shark. "Mr. Steele, I'm Judy Dobson." He spoke as he sat across the table. It was all I could do not to chuckle when I heard his name. "I will represent the St. Louis Police Department during these negotiations." "Hold on." "Dobson, I stated that this is not a negotiation meeting. If my demands are not met by the end of business tomorrow, I will file a lawsuit. Everything happened in accordance with the screenplay Jeb and I had devised the night before. Mr. Smith must have told you that you have no case." Dobson's face was flushed. The young female lawyer on his side of the table tried not to smile. "Yes, he did, but I'll seek a jury trial and take my chances in court." I gazed directly at Dobson, challenging him. Worst case scenario, I must pay Jeb's fees. Best case scenario, the jury will see what a hosing I brought inside with me. They'll criticize Harper, the department, and the city of St. Louis. It's your choice, Dobson. "Come on, Jeb, let's eat lunch so you can boost your spending account." I rose up and walked toward the door. Jeb rose, shrugged his shoulders at Dobson, and followed me. We had trouble eating lunch because we couldn't stop giggling at Dobson's expression. Jeb contacted me about 1 p.m. the following day. "We'll get a check first thing tomorrow morning, Matt. If you take care, you will most likely be able to avoid working for 3 or 4 years. Enough reminiscing." I believed I had picked up the phone and called Mr. Wirth. "Mr. Wirth, I've decided to chat further in depth about your case. I'll be out to your house tomorrow morning at 10 to collect further information, and possibly a retainer." "Is this really necessary, Mr. Steele?" "It is. It's entirely up to you whether or not I work on your case. I will see you at 10 o'clock sharp." Wirth hung up the phone with a little more force. Wirth's home was set back from the 2-lane blacktop road. You couldn't see it from the road. The grounds resembled a golf course with many trees rather than just a site to build a house. The grass was lush, with no barren places and an exact height. The address was so exclusive that it did not include a city or neighborhood name. It just said Street Point, Lewis County, and a zip code. The look Wirth gave me that morning as I drove up the tree-lined road to his house was priceless. I was driving my old pickup vehicle when I saw the right rear wheel fender was covered in body filler Bondo. I was getting the rusty area fixed. My truck has 3 different paint colors. I'm not counting the Bondo because 1 door and 1 front fender came from different trucks. In its defense, the old Chevy boasts a 350Q engine, which is only 1 or 2 accessories away from being a full-fledged racing engine. Not only does it perform well, but it can outrun most cars, including police interceptors. My truck is what is referred to as a sleeper. The classic phrase, "you can't tell a book by its cover," is especially applicable to me and my truck. When I came to a stop in front of Wirth's house, he gave me a disgusted expression and a grimace. "Seriously, Mr. Steele? Is it necessary to go to my home in such a horrible old vehicle?" "Yep, that is my work vehicle. My lone work vehicle. I had to close the driver's door twice to get it to latch. Should we get down to business, Mr. Wirth? Or do you want to talk about my ride some more?" I smiled at him and waited. He stared at my red satin St. Louis Cardinal jacket, St. Louis Rams t-shirt, worn jeans, and cowboy boots with the same disgusted look. Wirth wore a dark blue suit and vest with a lighter-colored pinstripe, as well as a blue-on-blue shirt with small diamond shapes on it that opened at the neck. I believe the shirt was a Christian Dior. His clothing was probably... No, not likely. His clothing were more valuable than my automobile. Worth responded, "Come inside, please," and turned to lead the way into his simple home. The mansion was designed to resemble one of the southern plantation homes seen in movies. Tall white columns supported a second-story balcony. I suppose he likes to stand out there and watch the peasants work. Inside, facing the doorway, I imagined a stairway worthy of Tara in Gone with the Wind. It was approximately 8 feet wide and led to a landing. From there, it divided. So there were 2 methods to go to the second story. "Jacqueline, please bring coffee into the sitting room." Worth desired a young woman wearing a gray and white outfit. The place he took us into reminded me of a living room. I believe the elite and landed gentry referred to it as a sitting room. The sitting area was wide and airy, with floor-to-ceiling windows on one wall. The view was of the groomed lawn and swimming pool at the back of the property. The furniture was mostly rotting, including glass-topped tables. This is a jungle. I pondered as I noticed all of the plants placed over the room. I suppose they want the sensation of being outside without having to deal with the heat or bugs. Susan Worth stood as we entered. This time she was dressed more demurely, but there was no denying that she was a very sexy lady. I'm quick that way. I'm a professional investigator, so I pick up on things like that quickly. She shook my hand and held it for a little longer than necessary, much to her husband's and my displeasure. "I'll have to be cautious around this one. I assumed you wouldn't mess around with a client's wife or girlfriend. It makes customers hesitate to pay the bill." I pulled my hand away from her and looked around the room. An oil picture of Susan Worth hung on one wall above a wood-burning fireplace. Now, I know very little about art. I know what I like, and I truly enjoy this painting. Susan was sitting in a basic chair without arms. Her legs were crossed, her arms folded in front of her, gripping her opposing shoulders, and she smiled beautifully. And that is all. Mr. Worth approached me while I glanced at the image. She also screwed the artist. He spoke with more than a hint of scorn and hatred in his voice. And then the jackass wanted full payment. She appears to enjoy tormenting me by banging the help. I turned to look at Susan, and she gave me a sexy little smile, as if to say, "You two could be among the lucky ones." Yeah, I'm going to have to be careful with this one. My thoughts reverberated again. "Okay, Mr. Worth. Tell me more about this, Stanley." "His name is Stanley Moore. Here's a picture of him," he added, passing it to me. It depicted a young man about the age of 25, with sandy blonde hair, blue eyes, and a well-muscled physique that revealed a six-pack. That photo was shot by a security company that monitors the house when we are away for an extended period of time. Worth instructed me, "Okay, I'll need all the information you can provide about good old Stanley, like his address, phone number, and so forth. I've put up an excellent biography on Moore." Worth handed me a booklet with Stanley's last known address and phone number. It also stated where he attended college, whether or not he graduated, and what he was interested in. Except for Susan Worth, that is. I stared at Worth with an unspoken query. The sections concerning his likes and dislikes came from his job application. He added, turning to his wife, "I'm sure Susan knows more about him than I do." Susan gave me one of her semi-smiles. "I don't know very lot about Stan." Looking at her husband, she explained, "We never chatted very much." "How did Moore approach you about the money?" I asked. Worth returned to his desk, unlocked the middle drawer, and searched for something while doing so. I looked at Susan. She's incredibly attractive. It should be against the law, I thought. Still, I'm not sure why Worth puts up with her trash. She clearly dislikes her husband, therefore I'm curious why she stays. You're being ridiculous. It is the money, fool. I shook my head, having answered my own silly question. Worth responded, "I received this by courier at my office," and handed me a folded sheet of paper. It was a letter, really, a note allegedly sent by Stanley Moore. The note stated that he had a 2-hour DVD of Susan and Stanley getting it on. He demanded $100,000 for the DVD, or promised to give it to friends, relatives, and business associates for the same amount. The note stated that he would contact them in a few days to arrange a drop for the money. When he received the money, he would send the DVD. The note was a Word document created on a computer. Even the signature had been printed. I understand this is a ridiculous question, but do you have those kinds of finances available? Mr. Worth. Jason Worth treated me like an idiot, as if I had inquired if the Pope was a Catholic. Oh, Jason has it, and much more, Susan replied with a grin. Don't you, darling. Let us continue our business. Our business. Susan Worth chastised her. The expression on his face was interesting. He was both proud that he had that much money and frustrated that his wife would talk about it. Yes. Mr. Steele, I have the funds. It will require a trip to my bank to obtain the cash, but it is available. Mr. Worth, how many employees do you have? I asked. What difference does this make? Stanley Moore is the one requesting payment. This note was printed using a computer or word processor. It is not truly signed by an individual. Anybody might have used Stanley's name. So how many employees are here all the time? Why? Do only those who dwell here live? Only someone who was here all the time could have recorded Mrs. Worth and Stanley. A stranger would have been spotted coming in to set up the camera or take the footage, unless there is someone who comes here frequently. It has to be someone the staff would not find weird to have here. There are 4 people living here. Worth paused and then proceeded, when I raised my eyebrows. Raising an eyebrow is an excellent technique to communicate without speaking. If you can do it, the raised eyebrow might indicate an inquiry, disbelief, interest in what someone is saying, or an invitation to continue. I rehearsed in front of a mirror until I perfected the trick. Samuel is the butler and home manager. His wife, Emily, is the cook and housekeeper. Wirth informed me that Ralph is the chauffeur. He also looks after the vehicles, and Jacqueline helps Emily with the house. After a few seconds, he resumed. Of course, Susan has a series of playmates. The most recent one is Danby Summers. He is here at least twice a week. According to the staff, he visits during the day, usually when I am in the office. Susan initially appeared astonished that Jason was aware of her boy toy's arrival. Then she smiled wickedly. If you spent more time with me, he wouldn't be able to visit right now, would he? Jason, if I spent more time with you rather than at the office, you'd have to work to maintain the lifestyle you've grown to expect, Susan Worth responded. Jason Worth appears to be in a difficult situation. I assumed that if he didn't make a lot of money, Susan would leave him. However, his frequent absences provide her with the opportunity to be stuck between other guys. Okay, you need to send me images and information on each of your staff. I'll be spending some time at your house checking things out and will have some questions for them. You can tell them I am a security consultant. I suppose that you have agreed to accept my case, despite your misgivings about our lifestyle. Wirth said something that made me relieved. Yes, sir. It is not up to me to pass judgment on how you live. It would not work for me. But hey, do whatever makes you happy. My aim is to stop Stanley Moore or whoever is attempting to extort money from you. What about the Danby Summers character? Where can I find him? Susan said, We're having a little get-together tonight. There were only about 20 persons present. Danby will be here. Won't you join us? I looked at Worth. He didn't appear delighted about the situation. I'm not sure if it's because Danby is coming to his house or because I'll be arriving in a social setting. I assumed a little of both. All right, Mrs. Worth. I'll be here at 7. Will you stay overnight, Mr. Steele? Mrs. Worth asked. That may be very intriguing. The expression in her eyes and tone of words were predatory. I doubt it, I replied. I'll make careful not to until absolutely essential. I thought, I don't mess around with married women. But Susan Worth could entice the bronze statue of St. Louis in front of the art museum. You understand that suitable dress will be required, Mr. Steele? Worth stated with a chilling stare. I believe I have a clean pair of jeans and t-shirt, Mr. Worth. The expression on his face was priceless. Sir, I pledge to clean up my act. Do you have a gun, Mr. Steele? I nodded and he asked, May I see it? I reached beneath my jacket to the small of my back and brought out my Glock 21C, which I showed Worth. I traded in my 9mm Beretta 92. After speaking with another former St. Louis police detective, Raleigh Chambers. He had a few shootouts with his 9 and switched to a .405 Glock, following the advice of Jacob Tully, a retired Marine gunnery sergeant and another former cop. Raleigh and I had worked on a few cases together while still working for the department and had become friends. Tully had been helpful in my decision to switch to the Glock. Also, I had just become detective and was full of confidence with my gold shield in hand. I decided to carry a point for 4 magnums, like Dirty Harry. I purchased a Smith & Wesson 629 with a 6.5 in barrel and brought it to the department shooting range. The first time I fired it, the recoil pushed the pistol back into my face. It sliced me over my right eye and required 3 stitches. Tully, the range's manager and head instructor, burst out laughing and had to sit down. That was my final point for 4 Magnum, the Dirty Harry experience. Worth grabbed for my revolver, but I took it away from him. "Nobody touches my firearm." I remarked, "My, that's a big one." Susan spoke and looked directly at me. "Are you good with it? And are you certain you won't let me to touch it?" With a smile on her face and an expression in her eyes. I wasn't sure if she was talking about the gun. "I'm sure, Mrs. Worth. I wouldn't want you to take on more than you could handle," I responded. The look on her face indicated that this took some of the wind out of her sail. Besides, I wouldn't touch you sexually if I were a monk who had taken a vow of chastity years ago and was now attempting to make up for lost time. Mrs. Worth was furious that I would not be persuaded by her charms, and speaking the way I did to her. "Mr. Steele, you're a cold man," she remarked angrily. "Yep, that is me," I answered with cold steel. "Steele, Susan. Behave yourself," Worth ordered. Then to me, "Can and will you use your gun once you find more?" "I'll find more. Get the DVD and he won't annoy you anymore. I can strike my target and will shoot if required. But Mr. Worth, let's get something straight. I am not an assassin, and I do not employ others to kill people. If that's what you desire, you found the wrong man." "No, I do understand." He stopped for a few seconds. "Mr. Steele, what is your fee?" "I apologize for leaving," Mrs. Worth replied, "but I have a tennis lesson and Sam gets irritated if I'm late." She approached Mr. Worth and kissed him. "I should be home at my normal hour, sweetheart, unless Sam keeps me." Turning to me, she added, "Goodbye, Mr. Steele." Mr. Worth didn't try to hide his smile at Susan's outrage, and he really laughed as she raced out of the room. "Sam?" I asked after she had left the room. "Another dude for her to play about with?" I assumed Samantha Dooley was her tennis instructor. If it was a man, I would have to keep an eye on him. Mr. Worth shook his head internally. "Mr. Steele, what is your fee?" $300 per day plus expenses. Mr. Worth and I require a 5-day retainer. Normally, I charge $100 a day plus expenses. But Jason Worth was extremely wealthy, and I simply didn't like him. So I increased my rates. "Is not that a little high?" "Not if you want your problem solved," I responded. "All right," Worth replied, went to a desk and wrote me a check. "Mr. Worth, as previously stated, it is not up to me to approve of your lifestyle, and you can tell me to mind my own business. But why are you letting your wife get away with it?" Crap. Worth blew up with rage at my query, but then he appeared to deflate like a balloon with a hole in it. Shaking his head, he responded, "Have you seen her? I know she married me because of the money, and until lately I could live with it. I mean, having her on my arm whenever we go out is quite nice. I suppose it is similar to bragging. See what I have, don't you wish you did?" He reached behind him to a built-in bar, retrieved a cut-glass decanter, and poured a dark tumbler of liquor. Worth directed the decanter toward me. "An invitation? It's Gentleman Jack, if you'd want a taste." I nodded, and he poured another glass. The trouble is that, if not love her, I have grown to be really fond of her. That is the primary reason I have tolerated her actions. Worth drank and stood taller, but now that her flirting, sexy advances, and suggestive conduct have become a reality, my tolerance is swiftly dwindling. I drank a good amount of whiskey and looked directly into his eyes. "Mr. Worth, if nothing else, you don't have to be concerned about me around Susan." He glanced at me for a few seconds, then smiled slightly. Worth handed me the check. "Thank you, Mr. Steele, for taking my case and making your pledge. How do we continue from here? I'll come to your small gathering tonight to check out Summers. Now I'm on my way to Moore's address. See what I can find. If either of them sent the letter and has the DVD, I'll grab it, and we'll have things done quickly. And if you don't get it done quickly." So what happens next? Then the search continues. Meanwhile, I'll pretend to be a security guard and inspect the residence. I'll speak with your team. I put the check in my pocket, nodded, and left the home for my truck. I realized my animosity for the man had reduced. and I felt sad for him. Stanley Moore lived in a basement apartment in a refurbished factory on St. Louis' near West Side. The structure was previously a cardboard box plant. I knew that lofts and top-floor apartments were pricey, but the ones below street level in what would be called the basement were usually far less so. I went down a short flight of stairs to number 1C and knocked on the door. No one replied, but the door to the next apartment was open, and an elderly lady was looking down the corridor. "He is not at home." She offered that he was going to see his sister. Involving, supposed to return tomorrow. "Thank you, ma'am. I gave her my card." "Could you please call me when he gets home? That is, if you notice. I bet the old lady noticed everything that happened in the building. I have a job offer for him." "Is that why you want to see him?" she asked. "Is this some sort of interview?" "Yes, ma'am. I would like to learn more about him. You're aware of his personality and other characteristics. Stanley is a nice young man. Always polite and helpful to me. Is he living here alone? Does he have a roommate?" "No, he's alone. But he recently had a friend visit him. A lot. At least until those two thugs came to see him. He left immediately after that, and I have not seen him since. I do not like his acquaintance. He's not particularly pleasant." The elderly lady shook her head. "Last week, I struggled to get my little pull cart through the door. He was walking down the hall towards Stanley's when I requested him to help me. He looked at me, smiled, and began clapping his hands. Then he entered Stanley's." "That was not a good thing to do," I said, shaking my head. "It would have been humorous if, after clapping, the guy helped her through the door. The guy is a piece of junk. I hope to meet him while looking for Stanley. Perhaps I'll have to demonstrate to him that politeness can be both taught and learnt." "How does this friend look like? And do you know what this man's name is?" "Not really. Stanley addresses him as RJ, but I've never heard his name. He's around your height with very dark hair combed straight back. I believe it's a dye job. Big shoulders, well-built, but sneaky looking, if you get what I mean. I bet his name is Smooth." She stopped briefly before adding, "It's unfortunate Stanley lost his job. It wasn't his fault, you understand? Really? That hussy seduced Stanley, and when her husband found out, Stanley was sacked. Stanley, a young man, had little chance against that woman's wiles. Of course, her husband would find out whenever that woman came over here. I believe the husband's worth is represented by his name. Stanley was blackballed, so he's having trouble getting a job. Have you seen her?" "Oh, yes." She would often ring the doorbell and walk down to Stanley's flat as if she owned the property. She always looked a little too provocative, tank tops or blouses, short tight skirts or shorts. A trollop and chippy, if you get what I mean. "Thanks for your time, Mrs. I'm Irma Foley. I'll phone you when Stanley comes back." Nodding. I turned and exited the building. I drove back to the Worths. It was time to play security consultant and chat to the other staff. Sammy will let me into the house and show me to the sitting room. Mr. Worth had to go for a while, but he left the information you asked for here, pointing to the desk in the corner. "If you need anything, simply press the button, and Millie or Jacqueline will appear." Samuel nodded and exited the room. There were many folders placed in the center of the desk. I sat down and noticed the button that would summon aid. "Must be nice," I reasoned. "You want a sandwich or something, so you simply press a button, and away you go." Instant satisfaction. I started reading the employee information folders. Samuel and Millie Ripley were husband and wife. They were both approximately 57 years old. They had worked for Jason Worth for over 20 years. Jacqueline was their niece, and she was 21. She moved to live and work with him 3 years ago, after her parents were murdered in an automobile accident. Ralph James was the driver, chauffeur, or whatever. He had only been with the Worths for 2 years. Something nagged in the back of my mind as I read through the folders. I read and reread the information, but whatever was tugging on my mind remained buried. Leave it alone. I thought it would come to you. The next step was to conduct a security inspection of the house and grounds. I proceeded around the inside of the house, including the second floor, scrutinizing the windows and outside doors as I went. I made notes in a notebook that I carried. It's necessary to dress appropriately. Don't you know? I made my way into the kitchen where Millie and Jacqueline were preparing lunch, and Samuel was sitting at the kitchen table, reading. I stepped up to Samuel. He looked up and responded, "Just checking inventory. Tomorrow is shopping day." I examined the kitchen doors and windows and generally obstructed Millie and Jacqueline. The third time I had to say, "Excuse me," or "I apologize." Samuel grinned and recommended that we walk outside and have a cup of coffee, Mr. Steele, at least until the girls were done making lunch. We strolled outside onto the patio and sat on a beautifully carved wooden bench. "Who are you really? And Mr. Steele, what are you doing here?" Samuel asked. He was not angry, just curious. "Why do you think I'm not a security consultant?" "You don't have the look," Samuel said with a smile. "You look and behave like a cop. Is this anything to do with the thirst for money, Mr. Worth? You have what? Demand for money. Nobody gossips more among themselves than houseworkers." Jacqueline saw the letter while cleaning the sitting room. Samuel smiled and shook his head. "I didn't think the youngster was smart enough to do something like this." "What boy?" Samuel lifted an eyebrow when he looked at me. I guess I wasn't the only one who could employ that trick. "Mr. Steele, don't play dumb. It does not suit you. Stanley Moore issued a letter seeking a large sum of money for a DVD. That is meant to show Mrs. Worth in him, or Stanley will make it public." Samuel chuckled. "I'm not sure why Mr. Worth would pay money to keep what is common knowledge secret." Now was my turn to raise an eyebrow. Mrs. Worth's DVD rather than the DVD itself is widely known. Well, antiques are. Everyone is already aware of her lifestyle. Everyone. He nodded his head. "I've heard folks mention her at some of Mr. Worth's gatherings here. How did they respond to Mrs. Worth's antics? Some of the men want to come next. Some wonder why Mr. Worth put up with her." He smiled again, and the majority of the women addressed her in derogatory terms. Of course, neither of their ideas is expressed to Mr. or Mrs. Worth face to face. "And do you and Millie disapprove of Mrs. Worth's actions? It is not up to us to approve or disapprove of hired help." "Samuel, I find this difficult to believe." "Okay, you got me," he responded with a slight grin. "Millie and I worked for Mr. Worth before Miss Susan entered the scene. His first wife, Miss Rebecca, was a wonderful person whom we adored when she died. Mr. Worth was a mess for a while before he brought Suzanne home." Samuel looked serious for a few seconds before continuing. "We were thrilled for him because he appeared to have regained consciousness. But now, we were here before she arrived, and we shall be here even if she left. Mr. Worth has our complete loyalty. She simply counts how long Mr. Worth wants or allows her to stay." Suddenly, as I was speaking with Samuel, the item that had bothered me while reading the employee data came to the forefront of my mind. RJ was the friend who came to see Moore, and Ralph James drove. Where would the chauffeur be now? Ralph? He's probably in his apartment above the garage, if he isn't working on one of the vehicles. "Thank you, Samuel. You are a really astute dude." I turned and proceeded towards the garage. I recall seeing Ralph's image in the employee files. The image matched Mrs. Foley's description. I discovered Ralph James in the garage polishing a Bentley. "Hello, this is Matt Steele." I introduced myself to Ralph. "I'm conducting a security inspection for Mr. Worth." "Yes, I heard you'd be around. I'm Ralph James. Nice vehicle?" I offered, pointing to the Bentley. "It's a Continental GT V8. Ralph, do you drive it much?" "No, not this one. It's Mr. Worth's baby. I normally drive the Rolls when I take them somewhere." "Do you know Stanley Moore?" I inquired, observing his gaze. "Not really. Just that he maintained the pool before being fired." "Why? Part of the security check." "So you haven't seen him since he was let go?" "No. As I already stated, we were not pals or anything. You know why he got fired?" "Mr. Worth did not tell me. He just had to let Moore go." Ralph paused, looked around to ensure we were alone, then responded. "Stan was caught banging Mrs. Worth. According to what I've heard, her husband either caught them or learned about it and sent the boy packing." Ralph snorted and proceeded. "Mr. Worth not only fired Stanley, but he informed all of his wealthy friends that he had to do so." The sleazeball laughed. "I believe he informed them that Stanley took something. Anyway, Stan can't obtain a job from the wealthy now, and the average folks can't pay enough to fund his acting performances. We've also dispatched a couple of goons over to Stanley's house to teach the boy a lesson." "Stanley ran away? Or was he not present?" "From what I gather, for a guy who isn't Moore's friend, you know a lot about what happened after he was fired," I remarked. "Gossip. Just gossip. The home crew is the biggest hotbed of rumor in the world," Ralph stated, "but I keep my ears open and my mouth closed. I also keep my pants on where Mrs. Worth is concerned. She's as hot as any woman I've ever seen. But I like my job and don't want to wind up like Stanley. She ever hit on you? No. But I've noticed her looking, you know." Ralph preened a bit. "Why is the security consultant so interested in what's going on?" "Disgruntled or former employees pose a security concern," I responded. I offered Ralph what I believed was a disarming smile and continued, "I'm simply trying to judge what a hazard Stanley Moore might be. Thank you for your help. You're doing a wonderful job with the Bentley." As I went away, I realized that Ralph was lying about his friendship with Stanley Moore, in spite of his saying the home was flooded with talk. How would he know about the men? Worth apparently sent over to the lad's flat. "I want to find Samuel again. If anyone knew anything, he'd be the one." "Hey, Samuel, can I chat to you again?" I asked as I approached the kitchen. He gave me a tiny grin, nodded, and followed me outside. "You know anything about Mr. Worth sending guys over to Stanley's?" "Did Mr. Worth do that?" he asked. "It's the first I've heard of it." Samuel considered for a moment. "If Mr. Worth did, it was to get that DVD you described and maybe rough the boy up a bit. You know, for having the gall to attempt and blackmail Mr. Worth." "Thank you, Samuel. Is Mr. Worth back yet?" Samuel nodded, and I began hunting for my boss. I found him in the sitting room having another glass of whiskey. When I stepped in, he nodded and raised his glass, giving me a drink. I shook my head and joined him at his desk. "I got another letter this afternoon," he added, handing me another printed page. It added that Worth would be contacted on Saturday morning and told where to bring the money. Stanley Moore's signature appeared again on the printed document. "Did you send 2 guys over to Moore's apartment?" The look I gave him made it apparent what I thought about it. "I did, but not to attack him," Worth responded. "I figured they might be able to get the DVD." "Pretty foolish, Mr. Worth. Stanley made an appointment with him. Any chance of receiving the DVD without paying for it?" I shook my head. "Not the smartest move on your part. What happens now, Mr. Steele?" Worth appeared to collapse in his chair, as if he had lost all confidence in his ability to get out of this difficult predicament. "I'll keep seeking for him. Hopefully I can find him before the week is done." I seriously doubted Stanley was the blackmailer. From what I gathered about the youngster, I didn't think he was sophisticated enough to come up with this DVD plan. I didn't share my suspicions with Worth. "I'll see you this evening," I said, and went home to see if I did, in fact, have a clean pair of pants. Jason and Susan Worth were shocked and a little delighted that I cleaned up so well. I was dressed in a light brown cashmere sports jacket over a white-on-white shirt, similar to the blue Christian Dior that Worth had worn that morning. My tie was loose around my neck and was a very dark brown knit. My slacks were a dark brown and had a crease so sharp you could have sliced paper with it. I still wear cowboy boots, so sue me, I like boots. But these were dress boots. Good for dancing, but not working. My, aren't you splendor?" Susan said as she greeted me. She carried a large glass containing what appeared to be a martini, drowning in olive. "Good evening, Mrs. Worth. Mr. Worth." He just joined us at the entry to the large ballroom. That's not the first of the evening for Susan. I imagined if I thought Susan was a distraction in my office or early today, tonight she'd stop traffic at rush hour. The deep green, low-cut, flowing dress she wore went perfectly with her hair color. Her hair was swept up in some sort of style, leaving her sexy neck and shoulders exposed. "Satan, get behind me," I said to myself, not for the first time. "Let me show you around, Mr. Steele," Susan offered. Mr. Worth stepped in and took my arm. "I'll see to Mr. Steele, darling. Why don't you see to the other guests?" "You're no fun, Jason." Patting me on the arm, Susan said, "I will see you later, Mr. Steele." Apparently, Susan's anger at me from earlier that day had been replaced by what she considered a challenge. I nodded to her and let Worth guide me toward the bar. He held up 2 fingers to the bartender, and shortly we both had a generous glass of Gentleman Jack. Samuel was right. It's good to be king. Danby is the tall, blonde fellow over by the fireplace, Summers Worth informed me. Danby had the look of the idle rich. He was tanned, athletic-looking, and I guess women would think he was handsome. He reminded me of some of the men I'd seen when I spent summers in Texas with my granddad. He held their type in contempt. Granddad characterized them as enormous hats and no livestock. Danby would have fit perfectly in. "I thought he doesn't have the stomach for blackmail, Mr. Worth. It's not him, and he's not a threat to your marriage." How can you be certain, Mr. Steele? You haven't ever met or talked to him. I've seen his type before. His main worry is the next party or play date. That will not cause him too much trouble. I took a big swallow of the whiskey. As for Susan, I mean Mrs. Worth. I believe she's only playing on your nostalgia for Danby. Susan was talking to 2 other women, so I pointed to her location. I added that she hasn't been near him or even looked at him. He's been here several times during the last 2 weeks, sometimes while I was at the office, Worth explained. And every time I am around them, well, I believe the term is flirts with him, says all kinds of double-meaning sentences and gives him sexy looks. Mr. Worth, your wife could give sensual expressions brushing her teeth. As I already stated, she is tugging your chain. Why would she do that? Look, I'm not a marriage counselor or anything, it's just my opinion. So you don't think Susan had or is having an affair with Dan Summers? Nope. What about Stanley Moore? Oh, I think she had all standard hookup. Why would she do that? I mean, so blatant. Worth seemed to be really upset. This wasn't the same guy who walked into my office and pretended like the world was his oyster. Makes me wonder if he was more than half in love with the woman. I thought in spite of her behaviors, I've got no instruction in the nice and fuzzy stuff. But I have met a lot of people in my line of work. Maybe she believes you're not paying enough attention to her, that you're spending too much time at the office. Perhaps she's upset because you forgot her birthday, or your anniversary. Or maybe she is just a jerk. You are asking the wrong person, Mr. Worth. I suggest you ask your wife. Susan chose that opportunity to come over and grab my arm. Come, Mr. Steele, and let me show you around. I am not here to socialize, Mrs. Worth. I am working. But if you don't want everyone to know what and who you are, you should act like any other guest, don't you think? Susan looked at me with a challenge. Her eyes silently warned me that if I didn't, she'd tell everyone why I was at the cocktail party. Go ahead, Mr. Steele, Worth suggested. Susan is right. I don't want everyone to know that I hired a detective to preserve our reputation. Lead on, Mrs. Worth, I said, setting down my empty glass. So began a series of introductions to people I had no interest in and would likely never see again. There was an abundance of Brads, Chads, and of course Danby. There wasn't a John, Bob, or Jim in the bunch. There were many Tiffany's and Heathers, but Daphne was not a Mary, Sally, or Jane in that group. A large number of bogus intellectuals, trust fund babies, and wannabes. I assumed that after making the circuit of the room, I would escape and return to my favorite person in the room, the bartender. I grabbed a gentleman, Jack, and turned. Standing in front of me was a female I knew, a woman who could compete with Susan in terms of physical appearance. I see you survived the ordeal of introductions, she said with a humorous smile. Seriously injured. But I made it, I explained. Hello, my name is Matthew Steele. This was one woman I wanted to get to know better, and I hadn't promised to stay away from her. More introductions? She asked. The smile grows. I'm Abigail Stewart. She offered her hand, and we shook as I examined her. Abigail stood about 5'8" and had an athletic build, slightly slimmer than Susan Worth. There was no denying that she was completely female. Her strawberry blonde hair was trimmed in a pixie style, which highlighted her emerald eyes and big lips. Abigail has freckles on her nose. Do I pass? She asked. I brilliantly replied, When I set my mind to it, I become a silver-tongued devil. You are staring, so I'm wondering if I passed your examination. Don't be coy, Miss Stewart. I believe you'd pass any inspection by anyone with a heartbeat. I replied with a grin. A girl can never be too confident, you know. Please call me Abby. I haven't seen you here before. Who are you aside than Matt Steele? I'm simply a business colleague of Mr. Worth's. That is a shame. It's a shame that I do business with Mr. Worth. Know that there isn't a better cover than a business associate. At the shocked expression on my face, she almost chuckled and stated in a hushed tone, I know you're a private investigator looking into a blackmail scheme against Jason. Busted. I said, How do you know? I attempted to cover my tracks. You cannot keep secrets from the household workers. They have better intel than the CIA. She laughed again. Besides, Jacqueline and I are pals. I met her at school. My face must have dropped slightly. Perhaps Abby noticed the disappointment in my eyes. I never had a decent poker face among women. Why that expression? She asked. I shake my head. Busted again. I responded with a sigh. If you must know, I had hoped to get to know you better. Maybe see a movie or go to dinner. But if you attended school with Jacqueline. I hesitated, trying to think of a way to explain what I was thinking without making myself look foolish. So what? Jacqueline is 21, therefore you must be close in age to her. You are way too young for me. Or perhaps it is. I'm too old for you. Thank you, kind sir. Again, I must have expressed my puzzlement. I mentioned that I met Jackie at school. I never mentioned anything about being in her class. I teach at Forest Park Community College, English literature. Jackie was in a handful of my classes, and we became friends despite the possibility of being indelicate or gauche. Just how old are you, Abby? A lady never likes to reveal her age. She smiled and said, but this time I'll make an exception. I'll turn 32 next month. I had a smile on my face. Well, if I can pique her curiosity, I won't be robbing the cradle. I figured as soon as I got my foot out of my mouth. Would you like to join me for a drink on the patio? I would love to. Mr. Steele, I've never seen someone remove a foot from their mouth. It might be fascinating. We located a wrought iron bench, sat down, and started getting to know one another. I heard that Abby grew up in a little town in southeastern Missouri. It was approximately 60 miles from the small town where I had spent the most of my summer holidays. When my family moved to St. Louis the year I turned 15, I discovered that she enjoyed the outdoors, particularly fishing, canoeing, and camping. After nearly an hour, I posed the question I should have asked at the start of our conversation. Do you belong to anyone? Does anyone belong to you? Abby grinned and chuckled. I mean, are you in a relationship, married or what? Married? Not anymore. Abby touched my arm. I've been happily divorced for 2 years. That is good, I said. She now had a stunned expression. This means I can invite you to dinner. Abby shook her head, smiling, and asked, when? When I complete the job for Mr. Worth. I will call you. I leaned closer to Abby and immediately kissed her. That is a deposit. The whole payment will arrive later. There will be a penalty if payment is late, she stated as she stood. We'd better go back inside before Jason sends out a search party. Does he pay that much attention to you? I asked. Please don't tell me you're fleeing with Worth like Susan does with her men. I assumed my good old poker face had failed me again. Jason is a relative, sort of. He's my godfather. My father and he were great friends in college and later collaborated on a number of business ventures. Daddy was the best man at Uncle Jason's wedding to his first wife. My father passed away last year, but if he'd been present, he might have prevented Uncle Jason's marriage to Susan. I tried, but yeah, the heart wants anything it desires. Logic and common sense have no role in this, I stated as we returned to the house. My, how profound. Matt, you have the heart of a poet. Abby smiled. I didn't know if she was making fun of me or not. No, I simply read that someplace. Seems to fit in Jason's situation when we stepped through the French doors into the house. Jason came hurriedly over to us. I am not paying you to seduce my goddaughter, Mr. Steele. I'll thank you to attend to business, Uncle Jason. Stop it, Abby replied. I don't need anyone to protect me, and no one has ever been able to coerce me into doing something I didn't want to do. Good thing she spoke up. I thought I was ready to tell Worth to go to Hack and take his cheating wife with him, but you're only a child, Abigail, Jason protested. She's about the same age as your wife, Mr. Worth. I put in, if you need to protect someone, I suggest you take care of Susan. Mentally shrugging my shoulders, I said to myself, couldn't you keep your mouth shut? Oh well, I was hunting for a job when I saw this one. Worth's face turned red in anger like he was going to erupt. Then he exhaled very loudly and the anger drained from his face. Mr. Steele, you are absolutely correct. Mr. Worth, I'll mingle for a while longer and catch up with you tomorrow morning. Join me for breakfast at 8 if you like, Mr. Steele. We may examine our alternatives in further depth. I nodded and turned to Abby. I'll call you once I finish my work. Worth wasn't happy with my statement, but he said nothing. How long must I wait? Abby asked. She was smiling and yanking my chain. Today's Tuesday. I should be finished by Saturday. That's soon, both Abby and Worth said. I said, I am not only good, but also fast. See you tomorrow morning, Mr. Worth. I wandered around the party for another half hour and left. The valet didn't seem to be too happy bringing my truck to me after driving all the luxury and sports cars, but became happier when I tipped him $10. Samuel let me in the next morning and led me to the very large kitchen. I would have thought Mr. Worth would eat in the dining room, I commented to Samuel. He does. Mrs. Worth joins him for a meal. That isn't too often, except for dinner now and then. Still have a seat. Worth greeted me. Millie, will you bring Mr. Steele some coffee and breakfast, please? Just coffee. Millie, thank you. I seldom eat breakfast. Mr. Worth slows me down. Suit yourself, he said and dug into a large plate of eggs, sausage, and country fried potatoes. He looks different today. I thought, more relaxed. Not so much strain. I usually have this effect on people. Worth wore fancy jeans, but they were still jeans. An oversized sweater featuring the Missouri University insignia and sneakers. I've never seen him without a three-piece suit and a frown. He wasn't exactly smiling this morning, but he didn't have that permanent scowl on his face either. Last night I watched Susan and Dan closely. Worth offered. He tried to put his arm around Susan or hold her hand a few times, but she slapped him away each time. She finally told him to leave her alone or he'd be kicked off the property. I think you're correct. There's nothing happening there. Very good coffee, Millie, I said. As I previously stated, Mr. Worth, I believe she is simply pulling your chain a bit. How did you know so much about people? This was not the same person that walked into my office like he owned the place. I could grow to like him a little. Years of experience working as a cop or detective. Mr. Worth, you need to be able to read people, their facial expressions, body language, and vocal inflection, if you want to become a competent detective. Susan rushed across the kitchen. She was dressed in a short white tennis skirt and a white wife-beater-style shirt. Dear Worth recommended that we have breakfast together. I can't. I have a tennis lesson with Sam and then lunch with Tiffany and Heather. Suzanne responded, I will see you at supper, Jason. Toodles. Susan dashed to a brilliant red Mercedes SL 550 convertible, and I watched her from the picture window. She shoved her duffel bag into the passenger seat, jumped in, and peeled rubber down the long, winding driveway. That automobile sells for around $100,000. I thought Worth had told me why he kept Susan around despite her affairs and behavior. Now I could see in clear red why Susan hadn't left. She was a money-hungry, gold-digging jerk. My cell phone rang. Excuse me, I said, and answered the phone. Mr. Steele, this is Irma Foley. I'm the person you spoke to about Stanley Moore. Yes, I remember you, Mrs. Foley. Stanley is currently in his apartment. He explained that he was moving to California to live with some buddies. Thanks, Mrs. Foley. I am on my way. Get there in 30 minutes or less. Is there anything you can do to keep him from leaving until I arrive? I do not want to cause you any difficulty, but I might use your assistance, Mr. Steele. I do not believe your interest is in a job interview. The elderly woman had me. Why would you want to see Stanley? Mrs. Foley? Stanley is accused of a crime. I don't believe he's involved, but I need to speak with him so that I can help him. There was stillness on the line, and I stated, I give you my word. Mrs. Foley, if Stanley is innocent, which I believe, I will assist him if he is guilty. I will see that he goes to jail. After a few seconds, it felt more like an hour. Mrs. Foley answered, I believe I can trust you, Mr. Steele. Stanley stated that a friend will be picking him up at 4 o'clock. He will stay here until then. Thank you again, Mrs. Foley. I hung up and checked my watch. That gives me 40 minutes to get to Stanley's and have a brief conversation with him. I thought I waved at Mr. Worth before hurrying to my pickup. The large block V8 would come in useful when I arrived at the apartment complex. I pressed the button for Mrs. Foley's apartment. She peeked out the window, recognized me, and buzzed me in. Stanley is still in his apartment. She claimed I didn't notify him you were coming. I nodded my thanks and moved carefully down the hallway to 1C. I listened at the door for a few seconds before trying the doorknob. The door was unlocked, so I pushed it open fast. Moore looked up and had a worried expression on his face. He took up a big table lamp and brandished it like a club as he approached me. Stanley told his son, "Get out of my apartment." I said, "Your mouth is writing checks that your body cannot cash." I shifted my Cardinals jacket to the side and displayed my Glock. "I will not hurt you. I just want to speak to you." "Did Worth contact you?" he asked. "Yeah, but I'm not like the other two," he explained. "I am not here to rough you up." He seemed suspicious, so I added, "Put the lamp down and let's talk." Stanley still seemed like he was going to sprint, so I shut the door and leaned against it. "I am a private investigator paid to find you. You are being accused of blackmail. Something about a DVD featuring you and Mrs. Wirth. The young man glanced at me for a few seconds before melting into his sofa. I know nothing about blackmail letters or DVDs. The first time I heard about a letter or a DVD was when Mr. Wirth's two men approached me about it. I informed them, as I have told you, that I knew nothing about them. He lowered his head and shook it. Stanley finally looked up to me. Susan? Mrs. Wirth and I did get it on, but I didn't record it. Where did you and Mrs. Wirth normally get together? It only happened a few times here. We previously used Ralph's flat over the garage. He was driving Mr. Wirth to meetings that day. How did you escape from Wirth's man? I was holding my door, attempting to keep them out. Mrs. Foley emerged from her apartment and shrieked at them to leave me alone, or she would call the cops as they turned to look at her. I booked out of the rear and went to see my sister in Baldwin. Today is my first day back here. Mr. Wirth has 2 letters requesting money. They both included your name at the bottom. It wasn't me, it's not me. All I want is to travel to California. Mr. Wirth has made it difficult for me to get job here. Therefore, I'm headed out. I can't find any pool job. He even had me blackballed at the Muni. I just want to get out of St. Louis. In California, there are plenty swimming pools to maintain, as well as plenty of acting opportunities. I believe you, Stanley. Looking at the youngster, I have an idea who sent the letters. I noticed him perk up. But Stanley, you'll have to postpone your trip for 1 day. Mr. Steele, what do you want me to do? His voice was exhausted and scared. You will have to play a role, Stanley. But I hear you're a fairly excellent actor. The young man did smile. He was happy to receive compliments for his acting abilities. I wasn't sure whether he was good or not. All that was required was for him to do what I asked. Mr. Steele, why do you care? I mean, you could just take me to Mr. Wirth, grab your money, and leave. Mr. Wirth hired me to resolve a problem for him. I took the work, so I will do my best to do it. I suppose you could call it pride in my work or something. I told him what I wanted him to do and when. Stanley initially shook his head, but he warmed up as I explained his position. The following day, he finally gave me a small smile, and I could see the wheels spinning. And Stanley doesn't even consider running. If you do, Mr. Wirth will send additional guys after you, including me. You can't hide from me in the Hollywood environment, and you definitely don't want to see me mad. I gave him what I believed was a stern expression. You certainly don't want to see me upset, I said, patting the buttocks of my weapon. There was a knock at the door behind me. I raised my eyebrow at Stanley. That is my friend Jimmy. He's also an actor. We're heading to California together. Stanley responded to my quiet question. I answered the door and welcomed Jimmy into the flat. If they ever produce a remake of The Incredible Hulk, they should cast Jimmy. He could play the part without using computer animation. Jimmy stood approximately 6'6" and weighed close to 300 pounds, none of which was loose belly. The boy's shoulders were broad, and his chest tapered down to a waist that was just slightly larger than mine. He was dressed in shorts that showed his tree trunk and legs, as well as a crop-top t-shirt that revealed his stomach. Jimmy had a 12-pack rather than a 6-pack for belly relief. If this youngster wants to cause trouble, there's not much I can do. I thought Stanley had a favor to ask of you, Jimmy. I'm hoping you'll help him out. Cool, Jimmy said. He went to the fridge, got a beer, and plopped down on the couch. Stan, what do you eat? Nodding to Stanley. I left and returned to the words, grateful that Jimmy was a kind giant. I parked my truck in the side driveway, walked around to the back of the house, and discovered Emily in the kitchen. Mrs. Ripley. Where? Samuel. I would like to talk with him. Please call me Millie. Everybody does. Sam is down in the garage, something like a busted water pipe or something. I spotted Samuel on his cell phone, standing near a puddle of water. No, the day after tomorrow is not acceptable. He listened for a few seconds. Did I mention I'm calling for Mr. Jason Wirth? Samuel listened again, smiling. Thank you. Have your man walk around to the back of the house and ask for me. He smiled as he looked over to where I was waiting. Mr. Wirth is somewhat of a monarch around here. It's great to be king, if you need something completed immediately. You remind me of a former Marine gunnery sergeant. He ran the police pistol range. Without Tully, many young cops would have been unable to qualify, and nothing would have been accomplished. I grinned at Samuel and remarked, without you, nothing gets done around here. Samuel remarked, you can put away the soft soap, Mr. Steele. What do you need? I was wondering if you could get me inside Ralph's flat up there. I would like to look around when he is not present. So you believe Ralph is engaged in the DVD mess? He looked at me, and when I didn't respond, said, "Come on. This is a good moment as any. Ralph took the Bentley to the dealership, so he'll be gone for a few hours." Samuel grabbed a key ring from his vest and beckoned for me to accompany him up the stairs to the second floor of the garage. Samuel unlocked the door and stood aside to allow me to enter the flat. I was carrying what appeared to be a camera back. He said, "I'll wait downstairs," and began to go. "I'd rather you stayed, Samuel. If I come across anything, I'd like to witness. I don't want anyone to think I planted evidence to earn my fee." He nodded, walked inside, and sat on the couch. Looking around the apartment, I pondered. Quite beautiful digs. The space was nearly as huge as the garage area below. It was one large room, roughly 40 by 30, that combined a living area, a sleeping area, and a galley-style kitchen with a large table separating the kitchen and living room. The only inside walls were where a full bathroom had been constructed to the room. "Yeah, Dix, it is very nice." I wandered around the apartment, taking in the surroundings, and came to a halt in front of a large bookcase against the wall closest to the bed. Ralph doesn't strike me as a heavy reader. I turned to Samuel and inquired, "You believe Ralph has read all of these books?" Samuel shook his head, smiling. Motor Trend Car and Driver or Playboy are more his style. I approached the case and began to examine the books closely. There were two that seemed distinct from the others, and I attempted to remove them from the shelf. The two volumes were actually a single item. They both came away in my hands. There was a video camera behind the book's phony fronts. I examined it and discovered that it recorded 2 discs, a disc suitable for making a DVD. That's approximately what I expected. I spoke primarily to myself. Samuel joined me in front of the bookshelves. "You assumed all along that Stanley was not the one who created the DVD, didn't you?" I nodded and responded, "Yeah." And when Stanley's neighbor described the guy who had recently visited him, I became skeptical of Ralph. I believe he sent the letters and typed Stanley's name on them. This very much proves it. "What will you do now that you know?" Samuel inquired with a look on his face that informed me what he was about to do. "So I have a small plan." Seeing the expression in Samuel's eyes, I immediately added, "And breaking his neck isn't one of them." I explained my plan, which is why I brought this little darling with me. I opened the camera bag and took out another video recorder. I replaced Ralph's recorder with my own and returned the bogus book to the shelf. The balloon will be launched about 3 hours from now. My equipment will not only record, but also send what it is recording to my laptop. I can watch everything in real time and record it as a backup. In addition, Stanley is wearing a wire. If everything goes well, we'll have this done by dinner time. I gave him an ugly look and said, "Then I will get out of your hair." "Samuel?" Samuel chuckled as we departed, remembering to relock the flat. "Mr. Steele, you'd make a good gunnery sergeant." 2 hours later, Ralph returned with the Bentley. It will be parked in its own designated area in the garage. The sleek and attractive car. Calling it an automobile was an insult. SAT alone in the garage with a 10-foot space on each side. There will be no unintentional banging of a door into this car. Ralph noticed me leaning on the fender of my beat-up but trustworthy truck. He sneered as he remarked, "You should consider upgrading your ride. A man in your field of employment should promote his success." "I cannot afford something like that," I replied, pointing at the Bentley. "I have a friend at the dealership. Ralph advised me that he could get you a great bargain on one." Ralph took out his wallet. "Allow me to give you his card. Tell him I sent you while he was looking for the card." Jimmy drove up alongside Stanley. He got out of the car, Jimmy trailing behind, and they strolled over to me. I brought my friend back up. Stanley spoke with a little arrogance. "You know, in case there is any difficulty." "Okay, Stanley," I explained. "I will go grab Mr. Worth." I turned and proceeded towards the house. I walked around the corner of the garage. I snuck behind it and exited by one of the building's back entrances. To avoid being seen when I entered the garage, I ducked behind the automobiles. Now it was up to Stanley. Ralph placed his hand on Stanley's shoulder before removing it in response to Jimmy's grunt. "What are you doing here, Stan? I assumed you'd be gone by now." "I was about to go, but I didn't want my reputation dragged through the mud." So I arrived to visit Mr. Wirth. Stanley sounded really concerned and serious. Ralph glanced around and added, "Let's go up to my place and talk for a minute, Stan. There's no need to tell everyone about your business." He pointed at Samuel, who was interacting with the plumber. Stanley followed Ralph up the stairs into the flat. Ralph looked around to see if anyone had spotted them before closing the door. I dashed out to my van, turned on the laptop, and waited for the fireworks. "Stanley, you should be halfway to California right now. Ralph said that if you linger around, Wirth will put you in jail. I understand I could go to jail, but I did nothing wrong. Well, except for going to bed with Mrs. Wirth. Thank you for your help the last few weeks. But I can't leave my name in the dirt," Stanley stated. "What are you planning to do?" Ralph asked. "I'm going to give Mr. Wirth this." Stanley answered and grabbed a DVD from his jacket. "I'm going to tell him I didn't send the letters and don't want any money. Then I'll be able to go to California free and clear." "You've got a DVD of you and Mrs. Wirth, too?" Ralph asked. He didn't appear to be able to believe his bad luck. "Look, Stanley, I was the one that sent the letters to Wirth. I mean, he has more money than he can possibly utilize. Why shouldn't we get a piece of it?" Stanley shook his head as per the script. "I don't want to be thought of as a blackmailer. What do you care what a bunch of rich folks here in Missouri think about you?" Ralph claimed he felt that his payday was flying away. "Let me get the money and I'll send you half. That way we both make out." I was viewing and listening to the chat on my laptop. This is cool. I thought, I've got the perp and didn't have to do anything but outsmart him. I heard Ralph confess and decided that was all I needed. I called a friend who had been waiting just outside the Wirth Estates entrance. "Hey, Frank, I've got the prick on video and audio. Come on, let's get him." The man I was talking to was Detective Frank Wins of the St. Louis Police. He and I had worked together before. I had been compelled to leave the department. In fact, he served as my training officer. Frank was now the lead detective in his precinct. A cop car drove up next to my truck, followed by Frank in his unmarked automobile. Frank got out of his automobile and strolled over to my truck. I pointed to the steps leading up to Ralph's. "Matt, don't you want to get in on the takedown?" Frank inquired as he motioned the two patrolmen toward the stairs. "Not into arresting people anymore, Frank," I said. "Sides. This guy is so slimy I'd be frightened of getting my hands dirty. But it's okay for me and my men to get our hands dirty." Frank stated he was pretending to be angry. "That's why they pay you the big bucks, Frank." Frank accompanied his men to the flat. Very shortly, the three cops returned, escorting Ralph, who was in handcuffs. "You have nothing on me," Ralph said. "It's my word against Stanley's." I held up my laptop. "We've got you right here in vivid color and stereophonic sound. Well, maybe not stereo, but we got you on tape, buddy boy. That recording was made in my place without my consent." "You can't use it in court," Ralph remarked smugly. "You'd be right if it was truly your place, but Mr. Wirth owns it, and I have legal authorization from him to wire the garage and the apartment. I don't believe he gave you permission. Well, I will have by the time your case comes to court. I was the one who seemed smug. Now steal. I'll see you again," Ralph threatened. His face was flushed with fury, and he tried to step toward me. "Give me a second, will you, Frank?" He nodded, and I took Ralph 2 or 3 steps away from the cops. Frank and the 2 cops were intensely watching cloud patterns or the manicured lawn and making it a point not to notice Ralph and me. "You may see me one time." "Ralph, there are too many," I told him as I stared into his eyes. "It would be a horrible career decision on your behalf. I don't think you'll like the outcomes. If we ever see each other again." I hadn't touched the man, or even raised my voice to him, but the look I gave him left no doubt about what I would do if we met again. Do we understand each other? Ralph tried to look me in the eyes, but he couldn't keep my attention. He must not have liked what he saw, for he sort of slumped and nodded. Good. I walked him back to Frank and turned to Stanley. "Nice job, Stanley. I praised the young man. I think you'll have success as an actress out in Hollywood." Stanley smiled. "Thanks for clearing my name, Mr. Steele." He looked toward the house and saw Wirth coming toward us. "Tell Mr. Wirth I'm sorry about Susan. Would you please? Come on, Jimmy. Let's get the hell out of here. Give me a call, Stanley, and tell me where you are. We might need you to testify." Frank nodded his thanks and put the handcuffed Ralph in the back of the police unit. I handed him my laptop. "I expect to get it back after you guys remove the recording. I'll see it's returned to you, Matt." Frank told me and drove away. "Who were those people?" Worth questioned as he moved near to me. I explained my successful plan and that the DVD had been found, and that Ralph was the actual blackmailer. Stanley didn't have anything to do with it. Well, except for sleeping with your wife. I let him leave. Worth saw the police cars drive toward the main street. I guess I can't punish Moore for letting himself be seduced by Susan. He turned to me and offered me a tiny smile. Although I would have liked to punch his lights out, he did say to tell you he was sorry. He claimed he couldn't help himself when Susan came on to him. I chuckled. Mr. Worth, almost any man could have jumped her. Yes, I understand, he replied. Susan can be a force of nature when she puts her mind to it. But why didn't you get with her? She made it obvious she was willing. Mr. Worth, you said you knew about my ex-wife. I couldn't do that to another man after what was done to me. I grinned and added that if I had gone with your wife, you would have stopped paying your check. We both turned to face down the driveway as we heard the roar of a powerful engine. Susan's Mercedes raced up to the garage and skidded to a halt before she exited. I stated it was none of my concern, but had you made a choice about Susan, Mr. Worth? He nodded and waited for Susan to join us. What was the police car doing here? Susan asked. Was that Stanley I saw leaving? Yes, it was Worth replying. He was part of Mr. Steele's plan to catch the real blackmailer Ralph, and if you hurry, you can catch up to him. Why would I want to go with that young thug? Susan asked. You don't have to go with him, my dear, but you do have to go, Worth replied. You can go with young Moore or go to one of your other male toys or go to heck, but you're not staying here. You don't live here anymore. But Jason, Susan said as she leaned up against him, I don't want. It doesn't make any difference in what you want, Susan. You can take your car and your clothes. You can even take your jewelry. You've got 1 hour to pack and leave. Worth nodded and walked toward the garage. He turned his head back toward his soon-to-be ex-wife. Contact my attorney when you get settled. You signed a prenuptial agreement, but I've made arrangements for you to receive $50,000. Goodbye, Susan. She glanced at me in bewilderment. I shrugged my shoulders and held my palms out as if to say what you're going to do. Susan began to trot toward the garage, but worse. Bentley screamed out the garage door and dashed down the driveway. The sound of its tremendous engine echoed for a long time. What will I do now? Susan asked. It may have been a rhetorical question, but I answered her anyway. I suggest you get your butt in gear and get packed. I think Samuel will throw you out in an hour. Samuel stood midway between the house and the garage, a contented grin on his face. Millie and Jacqueline were right next to him. The last I saw of Mrs. Worth was her cute behind running toward the house. After grabbing my camera, I got into my truck and drove away. As I left the Worth estate, I said out loud, Your free ride is over, Susan and Karma jerk. You like Italian? I asked Abby. I had called her the day after solving Worth's little problem. I love Italian, but I don't know a really good place, she answered. Do not worry about it. I know the best spot in town. Pick you up at 7. Abby resided in an old brick house across from Lafayette Park. It was an area of ancient stately homes that had fallen into popularity with the remodeling and yuppie culture. I stepped up to her house, rang the bell, and nearly collapsed when she responded. Abby looked great in a popular little black dress, except it was sunflower yellow. It was just short enough to be fascinating and low-cut enough to draw your attention. After I caught my breath, I returned my gaze to her face and greeted her. Then I let her stroll down the front steps to the street. She looked around and smiled as she asked, Where's that rusty old truck I heard about? Uncle Jason described it as the ugliest thing he had ever seen. He did not like my automobile. I wondered how anyone could not like my dependable truck. He called it deplorable and shameful. Abby tried hard not to chuckle. I informed him that the truck was my work vehicle. This is what I use on important occasions. I pointed to my 1963 Corvette split-window coupe. I refurbished the Corvette and painted it Riverside Red, one of its original hues. Abby's face brightened up and she even giggled. I've always been a fan of vintage Corvettes. Where did you locate it? I purchased it from an elderly lady in California around 6 years ago. Would you think she lived in Pasadena? A small old lady from Pasadena. Abby was now laughing. Her husband bought the car for her as a wedding present, and she kept it for many years until his death. I bought it and had it transported to St. Louis. I opened the door and helped Abby into the car. As we left, I revved the engine a little to show off. Where are we going? to a location previously known as Dago Hill, before everyone became so politically correct. Many Italians settled in this area after immigrating to America. Every year, the locals hold a large outdoor festival called Hill Day. If you want good Italian food, the Hill is the place to be. I'm astonished you don't know about this hill. I've had a relatively sheltered existence since I moved to St. Louis as a teenager. Do you believe I'd never had a tour of the Bush Brewery before last year? The Corvette completed the regular 15-minute drive in less than 10 minutes. I have a difficult time keeping the vet under the speed limit. I parked in the lot adjacent to the restaurant. Abby gazed about, intrigued by the neighborhood and the building next to us. This is the location of Gatsby's, the city's best Italian restaurant. As we headed toward the front door, I informed her that not only is the meal delicious, but it feels like we're dining in someone's home. You will see. I opened the door, and we entered. "Hello, welcome to Respects," the bartender hollered across the room. "There are tables to your left and booths to your right. Take a seat and your waiter will be right by you." He went to the left and said, "Hey, Sal, there is a cute young couple in front of the house. Will you take care of them?" Abby seemed astonished. "Aren't they informal?" I asked, chuckling. "Let's take the table and see what's going on," I recommended. Sal greeted us, brought us menus, and took our beverage orders. I persuaded Abby to try one of her gas station's legendary 24-ounce frozen fish balls of beer while Sal went to get our beverages. I looked around the vast room and spotted a rear corner table. I spotted 3 males I knew. Sal reappeared with the large cups of beer and we ordered dinner. "Anything else? While you wait for your order," Sal asked. I pointed to 3 men sitting in the back of the restaurant. "Do you see those 3 back there?" Sal turned his head. "What about those guys?" "Sure, they're always in here." I nodded and added, "Take them a round of drinks on me, please." I washed his Sal, walked to the bar, and then brought 3 of the fish balls to the table, setting them down in response to an inquiry from the largest man at the table. Sal gestured in my direction. The huge man raised his glass in gratitude and took a long drink. "Who are they?" Abby asked. "Frank is the one on the left who wins. Raleigh Chambers is in the center, while Tully is the big guy on the right. Do you know them?" Abby turned her head and stared at the 3 men. Tully raised his glass in salute to her and smiled. "Oh, I know them." "So how do you know them?" Abby asked. "Well, it's a long story," I explained. "It was like this before I could proceed." Someone entered the restaurant and walked over to our table. "Hello, Steele," Ralph said. "I said I would see you again." I nodded to him. "Ralph, you're out on bail." "No, thank you," he replied, turning to Abby. He inquired, "And who was this lovely little thing?" "Don't ever go there, Ralph." I stood up and faced him. The sight in my eyes and the tone of my voice caused him to forego whatever he had meant to say. "To, or approximately, Abby. Let's skip all the insults and threats and get to it, but I propose we take it outside so we don't interrupt anyone's supper." Ralph stepped back, nodded, and went outside. "You stay here, Abby. I'll be right back." I turned back toward the door. Ralph had already left. I followed, knowing I knew I had to handle this right now. As I stepped through the door, I felt a blow across my upper shoulders. I went to the ground and rolled, coming to my feet. The pain was bad, but I knew if I stayed down, I could be seriously injured or I might never get up. It would depend on Ralph, and I didn't think he would worry about my feelings too much. Standing, I faced Ralph. He had 2 colleagues with him. One of them held a short piece of 2x4 that he'd used to hit me. He looked surprised that I got up. Either one of the 2 individuals may have played linebacker for the St. Louis Rams. "I know you don't have any friends that would help you with this, Ralph. How much do these guys cost you?" The issue was already at critical mass, so I don't know why I tried to pull a rise out of him. "Whatever it is, it'll be worth it," Ralph remarked in a very angry voice. "I guess I got to him after all. And don't think about using your gun. We've got guns too." His 2 cohorts pulled back their jackets. One had a pistol in a shoulder holster. The other had one at his hip. One of the many things that Tully had taught me and others was that in a fight, be it with fists, knives, or guns, you must act first. The ones that postured or speak trash or hesitated frequently lost. My Glock immediately materialized in my hand. I'm sure the 3 confronting me believed it was magic. If this had happened 150 years ago, my draw would have put me in contention for the quickest gun in the West. I issued an order, motioning with my weapon at the two gunmen. Now, boys, using your left hand and using 2 fingers, pull your pistols and fling them in front of me. The largest of the two sneered at me. There's 2 of us. You can't get us both. Want to bet your life on that? I pointed to point 4 or 5 at him. Maybe you are correct, but I am going to get you first. You won't mind what happens after that. Another voice rang out. I believe the boy has a point, Tully replied, holding his own Glock beside his leg. It might be a good idea to do what Steele recommends. Frank and Raleigh were standing next to Tully, their Glocks at the ready. One of the males moved a touch too quickly for my liking. Slowly, folks. This Glock has a hair trigger, and we don't want an accident, do we? I didn't expect a response. This was a rhetorical question. Now, why don't you come over here with us? Frank stated. Allow Mr. James and Mr. Steele to conclude their talk. Tully signaled for Ralph's hired men to stand against the brick wall. Gentlemen, assume your positions. I am sure you have done this previously. Frank swiftly searched them. When he finished, he continued, You two, just stand there. Do not get entangled with this. Raleigh stopped watching the frisk job. You are on Matt. I recommend that you get to it before some nice soul phones the police. I kicked the 2 pistols on the ground in front of me into the gutter, ensuring my weapon's safety. I holstered it. Ralph, was there anything you wanted to chat to me about? He lacked confidence compared to when he had aid. He hesitated for a few seconds before picking up the 2x4 and rushing me. I moved inside the arc of his swing, placing a strong left hand over his right. I stopped his headlong approach, and he dropped the board with a straight right to his abdomen, bent him over, and another left to the ground. Ralph was finished. I knelt alongside him. Ralph, pay attention. I do not want to have this conversation again. Do you understand? He nodded, and I said, Say it, Ralph. I want to make sure you received the message. He coughed and spoke in a shaky voice. I understand. Good boy. I responded and stood. He's entirely yours, Frank. Again, Ralph, James, you're being arrested for assault. Assault with a lethal weapon. Assault on purpose and for being ignorant. He turned to the 2 linebacker wannabes and yelled, Beat it before I let Tully loose on you. For the rest of us, he said. I'll call for a patrol car to take him to the precinct, Frank explained. I have not finished my dinner. I turned back and thanked Raleigh and Tully. They exchanged smiles and nods. What do you see? Raleigh, who stood behind Raleigh and Tully, remarked, Buying the drinks gets you. Abby was in the open doorway. Her eyes were huge, and she still had the napkin in her hand. Darn, I thought. Why did this happen while I was with her on our first date? That relationship is probably over. I approached Abby and began to apologize. You certainly know how to entertain a gal, don't you? Abby replied with a wide smile. Come on, our supper is becoming cold. She took my hand and led me back inside the restaurant. A few minutes later, Frank, Raleigh, and Tully re-entered and returned to their table. Tully slowed as he passed our table and leaned over. I believe you've got a good one here, Matt. Do not screw it up. Abby heard him and softly said, Thank you. I nodded to Tully and smiled at Abby. Tully, I believe you are correct, I thought. Here is the next story. Mark Hurley reflected on his life as he sat alone in the dark. He thought he had everything. A fantastic job, a lovely home, and a devoted wife. Now he just had the first 2. He remembered his nearly 5-year marriage to Allison. They met at Marcus Financial Group, where she began as administrative assistants before becoming the executive assistant to his employer, Jake Marcus, 7 months ago. Jake's grandpa created the company, which is currently run by his father, Alan. Alan invited Jake into the business after college to learn the ropes, and Jake soon rose to the position of regional manager. Jake was meant to become CEO, but his promotion was years away. Mark appreciated Alan, who assisted him in returning to civilian life after being wounded in the Middle East. They met during Mark's physical rehabilitation, and Alan recognized his ability and offered him a job right away. Mark, who had just finished his business degree before deployment, accepted and began working for Alan 8 years ago. He finished therapy, got an MBA, and fell for Allison when she joined the company. They dated, fell in love, and married, with Alan generously paying for their vacation to Hawaii. 3 years later, Jake joined the company, but unlike his father, he was arrogant and alienated his co-workers. Alan confided with Mark about his concerns about Jake's actions. Mark Allen said, "You know, I'll have to make him regional manager eventually. I know I'm counting on you to set a good example and assist Jake in adjusting to his new position. Do you think you could do it? Alan is right. I believe so, but it will not be easy. Mark responded. What is your honest assessment of him, Mark? No sugarcoating, Alan insisted. He is overly haughty and does not listen to others. He spends too much time flirting and spreading his reputation around. Allison claims he's a carnal abuse lawsuit waiting to happen, Mark stated. Alan shakes his head. I was frightened of that. His mother spoiled him. I hoped that the job would help him mature. I will talk to him. When does Bill retire? Mark inquired. Bill Collins, the current regional manager, wants to retire within the next 6 months. He purchased a home in North Idaho for retirement, Alan explained. Alan departed, vowing to stay in touch. Mark knew he would. Mark recognized additional things about Jake but did not inform Alan. Bill retired a few months later, and Jake took over. Jake implemented some positive adjustments, but he also micromanaged and moved people about excessively, causing frustration. Jake visited Mark's office 7 months ago. I've been considering hiring a new EA. I think Allison would be a good fit. He said, My wife, Allison. Mark inquired. Yes, Jake answered. Gretchen is retiring soon and we need new blood. Have you spoken to Allison? Mark inquired. Not yet. I wanted to hear your thoughts first. What's she like at home? Jake asked, smirking. Mark disliked the direction of the conversation. Allison and I are happily married and she is a professional. If you believe she is qualified, offer her the job. It is her decision. Remember, she's married to me. I got it. If she accepts the position, she may be required to travel. Are you okay with that? Jake asked. My wife is someone I trust. If she accepts, she understands the boundaries. I expect you to respect our marriage, Mark stated forcefully. Of course, Mark. I respect you and your marriage, Jake replied, still smirking. There may even be a promotion for you that evening. Mark spoke to Allison. Did you talk with Jake today? Yes. He mentioned the E position and she responded. What are your thoughts? Mark inquired. It entails travel and late nights, but also a good raise. We could need the money when we have children, Allison said. Are you concerned with anything? Mark inquired. I am aware of the rumors, but do you trust me? She asked. Of course I trust you, but I do not trust him. He asked about you at home, which seemed inappropriate. Mark stated, That's just Jake. What have you told him? She asked. I said you're a delight to be around and we're happily married. Mark said, Good. I suppose I'll accept the job. Allison decided they would go to bed and make love before falling asleep. Allison accepted the position, traveling every 2 weeks and working late 3 nights per week. Mark supported her and saw nothing unethical. Alan died that night after suffering a major stroke more than 3 months prior. The corporation was saddened and everyone went to his funeral. Jake expected to become CEO, but the board named David Matheson as interim CEO. Jake was considered too inexperienced, but he was determined to prove himself. Jake overworked Allison, forcing her to travel and work late, which strained their marriage. Their bedtime routine diminished. Allison's clothes became increasingly exposing, and she became demanding and irritable. Mark confronted Allison on Sunday after returning from a trip to New York. Allison, we need to discuss what she said about us. Jake's schedule is crushing us. We need time away to reconnect. I apologize. Jake is busy. Things are insane. Tell Jake you're taking a week off. We need this. Following a pause, she agreed. You're correct. I'll talk with him tomorrow. The next day, Allison returned home happier. Jake agreed. Can we take next week off if we go to his Friday night party? Which kind? Just a small gathering with friends? Mark felt uneasy, but agreed. Provided Allison returned home early the rest of the week. Do you know any of these individuals? I've met some, Allison admitted. Most of his friends are from college, a few clients. Not sure who else I see, Mark said. Okay, but come home at a normal hour this week, please. I believe so. We had the Henderson account dinner meeting on Wednesday, but Mark understood it was a priority after Alan's stroke. Okay, it's Wednesday night. However, the rest of the week I arrived home on time. Deal. She grinned and wrapped her arms around him. Deal. She whispered and kissed him. Jake smirked as he entered Mark's office the next afternoon. What can I do for Jake? Mark inquired. Ali thinks you're in for Friday night. Ali. Mark had a thought. Yes, as long as she gets home on time the remainder of the week, we'll have next week off. We have the Henderson dinner on Wednesday. What is the party like? Mark inquired. Who will be there? Just a casual get-together. A few college buddies and a client arrive casually. Please bring Allie. Mark nodded. By the way, Mark Ali is excellent at her job. I appreciate you allowing her to do it without pressuring her. I would be lost without her. Mark wasn't sure how to answer. I'm glad you're satisfied with her work. One thing, however. What is that? Jake asked. Do you address her directly as Allie? Of course, why? Just curious. That night, he questioned Allison. Do you allow Jake to call you Allie? You never stopped me. He's my boss. He can call me whatever he likes, she explained. Mark dropped it, but it bothers him. The week went well, and she arrived home on time except for Wednesday night. They made love frequently on Friday night. Mark dressed casually and observed Allison getting ready. Her new dress was shorter and more revealing. She was wearing a strip he had never seen before and no bra. The dress had slits up the sides that exposed a lot of skin, and the open back nearly revealed her strip. He saw her bosom swell against the material. Wow, you look amazing. Perhaps we should stay home. She smiled. No, later. Where did you get the dress? It does not appear casual. I got it in New York. Jake asked me to wear it tonight, of course. Be careful. Someone might have the incorrect idea. She chuckled. I do not think so. Everyone understands their own boundaries. They're better. He hugged her and attempted to kiss her, but she turned him down later. I do not want to mess up my makeup. They drove to Jake's townhouse in an upscale neighborhood. When Jake opened the door, Mark smelled marijuana and became nervous. 3 young lads were introduced. Henderson's employees included John Whitehead, George Franklin, and Alan Jenkins. Guys, this is Mark Hurley. Jake replied with a grin. Mark, meet John, George, and Alan. Mark shook hands and pondered why Jake referred to him as the man of the hour, but did not introduce Allison. My God, Allie, Jake commented. You look great in that dress. The men nodded in appreciation as Allison modeled the garment. Mark did not like Jake's reaction. Let me grab you some beverages. Allie, white wine. Mark, that is okay. I do not drink much. Mark, I had a strong alcohol tolerance but stopped drinking years ago. He didn't want to risk it tonight. Jake returned with beers. Allison took a large sip, but Mark drank little sips, remaining sober. Jake brought everyone into the living room. Mark observed Allison seated in a love seat, and Jake quickly sat next to her. Mark took a seat opposite them and watched them intently. Sorry, old pal. Force of habit, Jake stated. Not an issue. Mark responded, staring at his wife. They spoke until Jake inquired. My father stated you were in the Marines. Yes, 5 years till a medical discharge, Mark answered. John asked, Have you ever seen somebody killed in combat? Mark nodded. Both. Allison seemed surprised. You've never told me that. It's not something I enjoy talking about. George took out a bag of marijuana. He rolled a joint and handed it around. Mark declined. Thank you, but no, I prefer to retain a clear brain, Jake insisted. Lighten up. Mark, this is a party, you go ahead. I would rather be sober. Your loss. Furthermore, you can stay here if you get too messed up. You're off next week anyway. He turned to face Allison's rifle. Allison grinned and nodded. Sure. Jake blew blue smoke into her mouth, and she inhaled, choking faintly. That's fantastic stuff, she says. Mark was taken aback, not recognizing this side of her. Jake handed back the joint to George. Jake pointed to Mark, saying that he is the company's top business analyst. He saved us millions of dollars and brought me this gorgeous helper. Allison grinned at Jake. And Mark realized that wasn't just a courteous grin. She appeared to hang on his every word. I consider her my work wife. Jake stated this while patting Allison's naked thigh. Mark thought he saw Jake's hand move under her dress before pulling back. I'd be lost without her, Jake concluded. So would I, Mark said as Allison looked down. I need to use the restroom. Mark spoke, breaking the silence. The first door is on the left. Jake directed in the restroom. Mark locked the door and stared in the mirror, suspecting Allison was cheating on Jake. He remembered Alan's instruction to pay attention to details. Mark spotted a few worrying signals. Allison's revealing outfit, her interaction with Jake, her new pill use, and Jake referring to her as his work wife. He decided he needed proof. He secretly began recording a video on his phone. Mark returned to the room and saw Allison hastily set up with white powder on her nose. The others also had it. Mark sipped his drink and noticed some powder in the bottom. What the hell? He became abruptly fatigued and incoherent. Are you okay? Allison inquired. Jake and the men rose up, and Allison grabbed Jake's arm. Mark tried to stand, but was unable to take a nap. Mark? Jake murmured as the men placed their feet up. Allison took off his shoes, and Mark observed her undress on the love seat. Allison covered him with an Afghan. I'm sorry, Mark, I truly adore you, she muttered, kissing his forehead. When he awoke, he fell deeply asleep. The home was dark and peaceful, with the exception of snoring upstairs. He realized he had been out for more than 3 hours. He paused the video recording and crept upstairs into the master suite. He spotted Allison naked on Jake's bed with one leg over him. One of the 3 men was also nude beside her. The other 2 were sleeping, one on the couch and the other in a recliner. Mark silently returned downstairs. He needed to find out what they gave him, so he searched Jake's kitchen and discovered a Tupperware container. He poured the liquid in and sealed it. Back in the front room, he removed Allison's keychain from her purse and discovered an unknown key. He pocketed it and grabbed Allison's phone, planning to examine it later. He sneaked to the door, placing his wedding ring on her bag so she could see it, and putting on his shoes. Details. He assumed he was looking for a security system but didn't find one. The strange key fitted the door flawlessly. He secured the door behind him and carefully drove away, not turning on his car lights until he was on the street. He drove to a convenience store and contacted his old friend, R.K. Evans, ran a private investigation agency. Hello, R.K. responded. I'm asleep. Hello, Mark. This is Mark. I apologize for calling so late, but I need your aid. What's up, Mark? You need bail or something? Not exactly. Can you come to my place in 20 minutes? Yes, sure. Is everything all right? I'd rather not discuss it over the phone. Gotcha. See you in 20. Thank you, friend. Semper Fi. Hurrah, Mark responded. Mark purchased a 12-pack of beer and cigars. He hadn't smoked since leaving the service, but he wanted something to help him relax at home. He put the beer in the fridge, lighted a cigarette, and sat on the couch with a candy dish as an ashtray. RK arrived, and Mark offered him a beer. He described the night's occurrences. Holy stuff, Mark stated when he finished. Mark handed him the jug of dosed wine. Can you have this analyzed? RK nodded. It will be Monday or Tuesday before I get the results. I need everything about Jake Marcus, John Whitehead, George Franklin, and Alan Jenkins. Jenkins works for Henderson Manufacturing. Here is a video of them. I get it, Mark stated. Do you want Jake's place watched from yours? Yes, if you can. I have a key. I did not notice a security system. RK took the key. Not an issue. How did you receive this? I removed it from Allison's keyring. RK nodded. You probably can't use any video footage from inside his home as evidence. I figured. This is personal. I understand, Mark stated. Mark handed him an extra key to his residence as well as the security code. I can now put up equipment. RK offered to return the essential high-definition cameras, audio, and even record landline calls. Do it, Mark stated. How much will it cost? Do not worry about it. You saved my skin in the Middle East. This is the minimum I can do. Thank you, old friend. Please let me cover your expenses. Okay, RK said. Let's look over the video for clues. Mark started the video at the beginning. Stop right there, RK said. Mark paused it back up a bit. They watched as the camera showed Allison finishing a line of white powder on the coffee table. Mark stopped the video. Damn, Mark stated. I noticed her just as she sat up. That definitely looks like powder on the table. Yes, it does, Mark said. Interesting. Have you ever seen Allison use pills? Mark shook his head. No, never. Let's see what else is on here. Mark resumed the video and they watched while he sat on the couch across from Allison. Hold up, Mark. Pause the video. What's it on the love seat? Aki asked. Mark peered intently. It's Allison's strip. I saw it before passing out, but I assumed I was hallucinating it. She must have taken it off when I went to the bathroom. He continued the video and they observed when the drug affected Mark. The camera showed him lying down with the others looking down at him. They heard Allison ask whether he was okay and Jake tell him to take a nap. Allison then bent down and whispered in his ear. Are you sure you don't want to tie him up and have him watch us? George asked. No, Allison said. This is plenty for a single night. We have all week. If he refuses to cooperate, we can always escalate the situation, Jake stated. John swings both ways. He laughed and said, maybe he could show Mark the other side. Mark's face flushed scarlet when he heard Allison join in. "I'd like to see that," she said. "Really?" John asked. "You let me screw your husband?" "Sure. Why not?" she said. "Maybe if you're pleasant, you can get him to do more." They all laughed again. John said, "I've never done a Marine before, but I doubt he can give as good a head as you." Mark battled the impulse to throw his phone. "Seriously, Jake, is he going to be okay?" "You didn't give him too much, did you?" Allison inquired. "Nah, he'll be fine," Jake stated. "He'll sleep for about 12 hours and wake up with a headache. He'll assume he drank too much. Tomorrow, I'll introduce him to the really difficult stuff. By next week, all Mark will be a powder user. Maybe I'll even have him work the street for me. Too bad dear old Dad isn't there to see his golden boy fall." "Is this why you detest him?" Allison inquired. "That's all I heard about in college," Jake remarked. "How Mark went to school while serving and fighting for America. How he worked hard while defending the country. Sometimes I thought Dad would rather have Mark as a son than me." "So, guess what, Dad? I'm Mark's boss now. I have Mark's woman, and by next week, your golden boy will be a powder user." They all laughed. "Are you boys with me?" Jake asked. They all said yes. "How about you, Allie? Are you with me?" "If not, you'll be on the street alongside him." "I'm with you, honey," Allison said. "I've grown to love this too much to walk away." They assumed she was referring to Jake's manhood. "All right," Jake said. "Let's head upstairs and start the real party." "Goody," Allison murmured, moving upstairs. "This time make me airtight." The video recorded sounds of lovemaking from the bedroom. Mark stopped the video and put his head in his hands. Mark placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "This is going to be challenging, but we'll help you through it," RK said. Mark nodded. "Thanks, Mark. What are you going to do?" "I'm divorcing her." "No doubt about it." "I understand. Why don't you get away for a few days? Let me handle this." "What are you planning?" Mark inquired. "It's best you don't know. We just witnessed a criminal conspiracy. Someone will go to jail, but we need you safe." "But I can help," Mark insisted. RK shook his head. "No, you are in danger. Remember Gunny Johnson? He's currently in Vegas. He owes me favors and can hook you up with a room." "Okay, let me wire the room for audio and video first," Mark stated. "Stay focused. Understand?" "Yes, thanks. RK, you are a nice friend." RK smiled. "Semper Fi, dude, do or die." "Hurrah!" Mark responded. Mark went to the porch with his beer while RK wired the rooms and tapped the phone. He configured the audio and video to be stored on a cloud server and granted Mark access to the system via the switch. "I'll call Gunny tomorrow to let you know. Do not do something silly, understand?" "I understand, RK Good. Stay strong, my friend. I will be in touch." "Thank you again for everything," Mark said. After Mark left, turned on his computer and accessed his bank accounts. He still kept an account in his name from before the marriage, where he was depositing 10% of his salary. Originally intended as a surprise for Allison, he transferred half of their joint account funds into this old account while paying off and canceling their joint credit cards. He still held a personal credit card from his original account. He packed clothes for a few days before loading the suitcases into his car inside the house. His gaze landed on their wedding portrait above the fireplace. She betrayed me, and I was filled with rage. He shredded the portrait with a hunting knife and threw all photos of Allison into the fireplace. He also added her wedding gown, but decided to wait before burning everything so she could witness it. He grabbed a beer and emailed the incriminating video to himself, then verified it on his laptop. He sent a carefully worded letter to each board member and David, the interim CEO, outlining what had happened. He reminded the board of Jake's employment agreement's morals provision, as well as the potential litigation and scandals his conduct could result in. He expressed respect for Allen and hoped that the board would act appropriately. Satisfied with his letter, he attached the video and emailed it to David and the board, stating that he would be on vacation but available via email or phone. He expected a response by Tuesday and planned to leave by then. He sat back, lit a cigarette, and watched the heat burn Allison's face in the photograph. With grim satisfaction, he unlocked her phone using the code he had set up for her. As he read her texts, he felt even angrier. They'd been sleeping together for at least 6 months, but in the last 3, Allison began openly disrespecting him. He discovered countless photos. Jake undressed Jake and Allison kissing and dancing in a nightclub, most likely in New York. Allison appears in explicit images with numerous males. There were 2 videos of Allison making love with Jake and others, including the 3 men from the party. He knew this was what she had been doing during her work trips. He copied everything and emailed it to himself from her phone. By then, he'd had 6 beers and smoked half a pack of cigarettes, using her face in the photos as an ashtray. When he saw the sunrise, he knew Allison would wake up and realize he had left, and he expected her to be awake within an hour or 2. He grabbed his loaded rifle, locked the door, and lay on the couch, hoping to get some sleep. Allison awoke at 8 a.m. I checked the clock on Jake's nightstand and then went to the bathroom to clean up. Jake and the others were awake by the time she emerged. Jake put on a robe and looked at her. "Do you want to go downstairs and start breakfast?" Jake asked. "Mark will most likely desire coffee when he wakes up." "Sure," she said, throwing on a robe and heading downstairs. She made a pot of coffee and went to wake Mark in the living room, but he was not there. The Afghan was flung aside and his shoes were missing. She dashed around checking the bathroom, but he was not there. She noticed the automobile had left and his ring was on her purse. "Oh no," she gasped and dashed upstairs. Jake stopped her in the bedroom. "What is wrong? He's gone." "What do you mean by gone?" "He must have awoken and departed. He drove away without his ring. Call him and ask him to come back, okay?" She muttered this while running downstairs. She placed Mark's ring in her handbag and searched for her phone, but could not find it. Jake had already made his way downstairs. "My phone is gone. Use the home phone. You do not comprehend. It's full of the messages, photos, and videos you sent. If he possesses it, he has seen them. Do not worry. Please get them over here. We will handle it. Now call him." Allison took up the phone and hesitantly dialed Mark's cell number. "Hello?" Mark responded, sounding sleepy. "Mark, sweetheart? It's me. What the hell do you want?" He let out a growl. Allison recoiled. He had never spoken to her in that way before. She thought he must be furious, but she had no idea how much. "Mark, honey, I was worried because you weren't here when I got up. Are you okay? What the hell do you care which, sweetheart? I need you to pick me up from Jake's residence. Could you do that, please?" Mark laughed. "Screw you. I may have been clueless yesterday, but no more. You can never call me love or honey again. Mark, please do not be furious. I love you. Yes, right. Which? Tell me another one. Mark, we need to discuss." "Damn right we do. Then come pick me up at Jake's and we can talk on the way home." "The wrong answer. I'm not going over there. If you want to talk, Walker, call an Uber. The only thing we need to talk about is how to divide it up." "What exactly do you mean when you say split things up? That's what happens in divorce and I don't want one. Can't we figure it out?" I didn't want to be disoriented and cucked either. Come home if you want to discuss. But do not let Jake or anyone else come here. I am armed, and if they enter my residence, I'll blow their heads off. I get it. Okay, I will call an Uber. Do so and bring cash or an ATM card. Why? Because your credit card no longer works. Why isn't it working? I canceled it yesterday night. Oh, she spoke quietly. By the way, do you know where my phone is? Yeah, it's on the coffee table. I have an interesting collection of photos and movies. Now I know what you've been doing for the past 3 months. They will aid me with my divorce. Oh my God, Mark, I sincerely apologize. I never intended to hurt you. Shut up! Witch! Save your excuses for someone who is interested in talking with you. Do it now and arrive alone. I will be there. Mark, I'm hanging up the phone. She looked at Jake. Well, Jake asked, he isn't arriving. I need to go there and talk to him. All right, we will take you then. She shakes her head. No, he is armed. He threatened to eliminate everybody who showed up. I've never heard him that angry. Jake paused for a bit before going to his study. He returned with a syringe. Here is the plan. Put it in your purse. Call an Uber and we will follow you to your destination. When you have the chance, inject this into his arm. Then call me. We will take him up and place him in my trunk. What is it? She asked. A unique combination containing heroin, smack, and something to knock him out. It works quickly and will not harm him. Just stick with it and phone me when he's out. Got it? He handed her the syringe, which she put in her purse. Okay, she replied. Just guarantee that you won't injure him. We will do our best. Okay, boys, he remarked, glancing at the 3 men who were laughing. Call for a ride. She scheduled an Uber pickup in 30 minutes and walked upstairs to finish getting ready. When the driver arrived, she departed. Jake and his companions followed and parked a street away. They hadn't noticed the white van parked across the street. A few minutes after conversing with Allison, Mark's telephone rang. It was RK. "What up?" Mark inquired. "I just wanted to let you know. My guys overheard a chat between your wife and her accomplices," Mark explained. "What?" Mark inquired. "My friend Mark mentioned modern technologies. A parabolic microphone picked it up. Your wife is getting an Uber, and her friends are following. They intend to poison you and kidnap you. It's inside her purse. She will hit you with it whenever she can. My boys will accompany Jake and his crew." "Damn," Mark stated. "Yeah," Mark advised caution. "I'll text you once they depart. When she arrives, turn on the surveillance equipment, and I will monitor it. I am just down the street. I'll contact the cops if necessary. Be ready." "Okay, thank you." Mark received the SMS around a half hour later while on the move. "Showtime," Mark murmured. He had roughly 20 minutes till they arrived, so he hid the weapon where Allison couldn't find it and turned on the surveillance equipment. In the kitchen, he took a Ziploc bag for the syringe and a tissue. He watched from the window as the Uber arrived and Allison nervously left, clutching her purse. He lit the fireplace, putting the photos and her clothes on fire. When she walked in, she cringed at the smell of cigar smoke. Her eyes widened at the sight of the burning portrait and her bridal gown. "You're destroying photographs of my wedding outfit. Mark, why are you doing this?" Tears flowed down her cheeks, but Mark was unaffected. "I wanted you to see how your actions affected us." She examined the beer bottles and cigarette butts in the sweets dish. "I thought you had a low alcohol tolerance. I never knew you smoked. I quit smoking, and when I drink, I get mean. I almost killed a man once. I decided not to drink again, just like you chose to be Jake's witch." "Oh my God, Mark, what did I do? Tell me what happened to you. You used to be really lovely and kind. Since when have you snorted cocaine? Who are these men? Who have you been with?" "Mostly clients," she said quietly. "Jake made me wonderful. Marcus's finances could be ruined as a result of your activities. How long have you been planning to kill and abuse me? Was that your idea or Jake's?" She appeared shocked. "I never," she began, but Mark cut her off. "Say nothing," he said, taking out his phone. He showed a video of her and her accomplices talking over him. Her cheeks grew white as she heard her own words. "How did you get that?" she asked. "It doesn't matter," Mark explained. "What matters is that David and the board members now have the video. The cops will have it too. We are getting divorced. And if I get my way, you'll be imprisoned for a long time. I simply want to know why." "You do not comprehend," she said. "It is a long story. Perhaps you can tell me when I'm less likely to wring your neck." Mark claimed he saw her begin to open her purse and yanked it off her shoulder, tossing the contents on the coffee table. He grabbed the syringe with a tissue. "Is this what you've planned for me? Do you know what it is?" "Not precisely." "Not precisely?" he asked sarcastically. "You were about to inject me without knowing what it would do. You are one sick witch. Did Jake tell you to do this?" She nodded. "Yes, so if Jake tells you to stick a hot poker up your buttocks, you do so. You were meant to inject me, then call him to come abduct me, correct?" "Ashamed." She nodded. "Pretty much." "All right, this is what we will do. Call Jake. Turn it on speaker and tell him you did it. I will take it from there. Do not let him know I'm waiting. Got it? Want me to set him up?" "Yes. Any questions?" She shakes her head. "No, I do understand." "Good. Now, do it. And no trickery." Mark watched as she called and placed the phone on speaker. "Jake, it's me. Allie, it's finished. He's gone. Good day, girl. We will be right there." She finished the conversation and stared at Mark. "He'll eliminate me if he discovers you're not out. Bad luck. Remember? No signals. Otherwise, I may eliminate you myself." Mark sat in a recliner, waiting. When he observed Jake and his three friends through the window, he pretended to be asleep while keeping his eyes slightly open. Jake stepped in, examined the mess, and approached Mark. "You did well," Jake informed Allison. "Now we'll put him in the trunk." As Jake reaches for Mark, Mark opened his eyes and smacked Jake in the throat before he could respond. Mark kicked him hard in the lap. The other three males attempted to assist, but our case team detained them. Jake dropped to his knees, gasping in anguish. Mark snuck behind him, pulled out his hunting knife, and grabbed Jake's hair, putting the knife to his throat. "Make peace with God." Mark let out a growl. "I am going to cut off your head." Jake peed his pants in terror while Allison recoiled in dread, wondering who the creature was. Mark started placing the knife against Jake's throat when he cried, "Sergeant, don't do it! Drop that knife! The police are on the way! He deserved to die!" Mark knelt in front of Jake, exclaiming something arcane. "Yes, he does, but not through your hands. If you kill him, you will wind up in jail. Let the authorities handle it. Please, as a friend, put the knife down. He will bear the consequences of his actions." Mark gazed at RK, feeling Jake tremble with terror. He slowly drew the knife away and stood up. Arcade turned Jake over. Zip bound his hands and instructed Allison to lie face down while he secured her hands. As she watched a picture of herself and Mark burn in the fireplace, hot tears streamed down her face. Mark sat on the couch, watching RK secure Allison and Jake. The other three were apprehended in the front yard by RCA members. Police sirens became louder as cruisers came to a halt in front of the residence. RK said, "Hand me your phone. I'll talk to the cops before they come in." Mark handed him the phone as RK departed. Jake turned to face Mark, his smirk now gone. "My father has always loved you more than me," Jake explained. "Not true, Jake," said Mark. "He always thought you'd develop enough to fill his shoes one day." "Would you truly have cut off my head?" Jake asked. "We'll never know, right?" Mark responded. "But I promise you that wherever you go, you will encounter people who will not hesitate, like I did. And if you come for me again, I will not hesitate." Jake rested his head back in stillness. 3 large police officers entered, examined the scene, and read Jake and Allison their Miranda rights before leading them to the vehicles. One cop grabbed the syringe and plastic bag off the sofa table. "Is this what they intend to use on you?" he asked Mark. "Yes, it is," Mark confirmed. The officer took Mark's entire statement and stated, "You were lucky. Do you know that?" "No, my fellow Marine had my back." The cop grinned and nodded. "Semper Fi," the officer remarked, shaking Mark's hand. "Ora," Mark replied. After the police had left, RK joined Mark on the couch. "Got another one of those?" he asked, pointing to the beer bottles. "I guess I have 1 or 2 left. Isn't it a bit early for this? What happens after this?" "No," Mark replied as he handed him a cold bottle. "How are you holding up?" "Okay. It feels like Iraq. I need to decompress." "Yeah, about that. I spoke to Gunny. He will take care of everything. If you'd want to spend a few days in Vegas, here's his number. I might do that. I have some things to take care of here first." RK Mark was given 2 cards, his phone number, and the contact information for Michelle Hawkins, his divorce lawyer. "She despises cheats and expects you at 8 a.m. Monday." "Thank you for everything," Mark remarked. "Semper Fi, brother, do or die," Mark stated. "Ura," Mark responded. After they finished their beers, Ray stood up. "You have some cleaning to perform. I'll come by later to acquire the surveillance equipment." RK Mark left and started cleaning the house. That afternoon, Mark got a call from David Matheson. "Mark, this is David Matheson," he said when Mark responded. "Yes, Mr. Matheson, what can I do for you?" Mark inquired. "Call me David." "I received your email and watched the video, as did the board. We agree with your letter. It was excellent." "Thank you, David. You are welcome. We also decided to terminate Allison and Jake's employment immediately while they are in detention. I'm going to the county jail to handle it directly. There is something else." "What is that?" Mark inquired. "We believe you should take a few days to decompress. Do you have anywhere to go? My friend offered to care after me in Vegas. I have a divorce lawyer appointment on Monday. Then I'll go out. Vegas sounds perfect. Mark, enjoy your trip. We will see you a week from Monday." "Thank you, David, I will. One more thing. We all agreed that you would be the best person to take Jake's job." "Me?" Mark inquired. "Yes. We are impressed by how you manage this, and the board appreciates your efforts. There will be wage increases and other benefits. You deserved it. Thank you, David. Do not thank me yet. First, you will oversee an external audit of everything. Jake handled it. The auditors will report to you, and you will report back to me. That sounds like an excellent concept. I've learned that Jake had Allison engage in lovemaking with several of his clients. Good God, so I'll leave that to you. Have a safe journey, and we'll see you next week on Monday. See you then, David. Thanks. Following the call, Mark finished cleaning the house and mowed the lawn. He called Gunny Johnson and the two caught up. "So you want to come out for a few days to have some fun?" Gunny asked. "Yes, sure. All right, come out. I'll provide you with a comfortable hotel and show you the ropes. But remember that this is Las Vegas, not Bangkok." They laughed. "I'll remember, Gunny," Mark responded. Gunny replied, "See you on Monday evening, CMMC." RK stopped by to get equipment. Quick update. Cops investigated Jake's home and discovered a plethora of medications, love-making gadgets, DVDs, and other items. Jake was a total creeper. My guy on the force stated there's probably more unlawful stuff they haven't discovered yet. Damn. RK stayed for supper, and Mark fell asleep soon after, mentally and physically weary. The next day, Mark emptied Allison's possessions into trash bags and brought them to the garage. He planned to take them to Goodwill until he knew she was going to prison. The next morning, he came at Michelle Hawkins' workplace at 8 a.m. She read his proof and documents, taking notes as he spoke. She discussed California's divorce laws, pointing out that everything is typically divided evenly. They had no children, and he owned the house prior to marriage. He'd probably keep the house, while Allison would receive the remaining half of their bank accounts. Her infidelity could not be brought up during the divorce, but the criminal accusations could influence the judge. She also said that he would most likely not have to pay support while she was incarcerated, but that could change once she was released. Michelle promised him, "I'll make this as painless as possible. I'll prepare the paperwork and have them served. If she signs, I'll give them to the judge and there will be a 6-month wait." Mark agreed and handed her a retainer before leaving home. He visited the county jail to inform Allison that he was filing for divorce. Sitting at a table, he watched as she was led out, looking haggard in an orange jumpsuit. They grabbed up the handsets and began communicating through the plexiglass shield. "Hello, Allison." "Hello, Mark. I wanted to let you know that I am filing for divorce. I saw a lawyer today. I assumed you would," she said. "When is your arraignment?" "Tomorrow, a.m. The prosecutor is requesting no bail. That is probably best. Now tell me something. Honestly." "What is that?" she asked. "What has happened to you?" She looked down in embarrassment. Everything was going great at first. Jake looked like any other executive. Jake became upset after Alan died. He was not promoted and blamed you. He felt his father had set things up for you. "That is ridiculous," Mark stated. Alan wished Jake would become CEO one day. "I understand," she said. "We spent the weekend in New York at a club where clients danced and drank. I flirted a bit, but I didn't think it was inappropriate. The next thing I knew, I was in bed with 2 guys and feeling great. Jake came in later." She paused. "The following morning, I felt guilty. Jake then showed me images and films he had taken and threatened to show you if I didn't do what he wanted." "So, he blackmailed you," Mark said, presumably dazed. "You too. He did." He admitted it afterward. "It's no surprise that they found medications in his home." "Did he put you on powder?" She nodded. "Yes, also drugs and other stuff." "How many clients have you slept with?" She shrugged. "I'm not sure, numerous. Jake set everything up whenever we traveled." Mark shook his head at the footage. "It appeared that you enjoyed dating me, making me a powder user for Jake. Was Wednesday's meal actually about the Henderson project?" She shakes her head. "No, we were organizing Friday's party, so you arranged everything in advance." Allison nodded. "Yes, I apologize. Mark, that's the first time you've mentioned something I agree with. Will you forgive me?" He chuckled. "Not only no, but hell no. You cheated on me with that imbecile. Who knows how many others. Then you planned the pill and assaulted me. You are out of your mind. And don't even ask whether we can become friends. I understand, Mark. I hope it was worthwhile. Goodbye, Allison." He hung up as tears streamed down her face. He got home, packed, and left for Vegas. He caught up with Gunny Johnson and reminisced over supper. Gunny then showed him around, gave him some gaming advice, and led him to his room. Inside, a beautiful young brunette sat on the bed. She rose as they entered. "Mark, this is Candy." Gunny spoke. "She will be your tour guide while you are here." "Gunny, this is unnecessary," Mark stated. "That's nonsense, son. This is exactly what you need after all your wife has put you through. Relax, have a great time, and remember what happens here stays here." Normally, they laughed. "I've got to go. You two have fun." Gunny stated that before leaving, Mark turned to Candy. "Tell me, are you an escort courtesan?" Not anymore, Candy stated. Thank you to Gunny, I'm out of a difficult predicament. I'm clean, attend to school, and have a legitimate job. He told me about you and asked if I wanted to spend time with you. That is all. If you want, I'll go and not bother you again. No, Mark stated. He's correct. I could need some companionship right now. And you're a wonderful woman. Would you like to go out to drink? That sounds nice, she responded, smiling. They went to the club, had some drinks, and spent a few hours talking and dancing. Back in his room, she helped him forget about his problems. He awoke to see her near him. They had a shower together and dressed. I have school today, but I can meet you here evening if you choose, she said. This sounds like a plan, he said. They kissed before she left, and then he walked downstairs for breakfast. Then he went to the casino and tried his luck. Following Danny's instruction, he walked away with $300. He used it for dinner, drinks, and a performance with Candy that night. She won again, shocked his universe. The remainder of the week went on as usual, and by Friday, he was ready to return home and resume his normal life. Candy hated to see him go, but she understood. She offered him her phone number and email address in case he wanted to contact her again. He liked her, but doubted it would lead to a genuine relationship. She was considerably younger and had a full life ahead of her. Still, he wondered, who knows? He drove home smiling. Candy's memories were filling his thoughts. When he came home, he read the latest news concerning Allison and her organization. After considering the prosecutor's evidence, the judge ruled that they be jailed without bail. He also received confirmation from Michelle that Allison had received divorce papers. According to Michelle, Allison signed them immediately, and they were filed with the court. In 6 months, he would be free of her forever. The next Monday, he arrived at work to find that all of his belongings had been transferred into Jake's old office. Everyone welcomed him back and wished him well in his new role. He settled in and talked with the external auditors. He got them set up and met his new helper, Marcia Bowden. He had known her since she joined the company a few years ago. He loved Marcia, was aware she was married, and had received great comments from her past superiors. She was also aware of his condition, but avoided mentioning it. The audit discovered multiple errors in Jake's papers. For example, he had falsified his expense statement for excursions he and Allison had taken. The auditors discovered that Jake had misused several client accounts. This was reported to the SEC, and Jake was charged federally shortly after. Mark and David spent the next several months clearing up the mess Jake had left behind. Fortunately, their prompt response did not cost them any clients, but they did have some difficult interactions with other executives who were understandably furious. Meanwhile, Mark maintained contact with Candy, primarily through email. She eventually informed him she had met someone at school and they were serious. He was not surprised and wished her well. At the same time, Allison and Jake's trials dragged on, with further charges and motions. Mark found himself testifying against his wife and her collaborators, despite her defense team's attempts to discourage him by claiming he was not compelled to do so. I may not be required to, but I want to, he informed her attorney. Besides, in a few weeks, she will no longer be my wife. The jurors was astonished by his evidence, and even more so when the video Mark shot that Friday night was shown to them. The jury's decisions were finally announced on the designated day. Mark and David sat in the courtroom watching as Alice, Jake, and the other 3 guys were led in. Neither of them could meet Mark's eyes. By now, the trial had become a media circus. The court was brought to order, and the judge inquired whether the jury had reached a conclusion. The foreman stood and confirmed that they had. Everyone held their breath as the judge read out the charges, which included conspiracy to kidnap and assault. Jake faced additional charges stemming from the medications discovered in his townhouse, as well as the sexual images and videos he shared with other women. They were all found guilty of every charge. The judge established the date for sentencing, and the 5 convicted conspirators were escorted from the courtroom. Mark and David walked out, pushed past the crowd of reporters and thrusting cameras in their faces. About 10 days later, the sentencing occurred. The judge made it apparent that he was completely upset with all 5 of them, and virtually tossed the book at them. Jake's 3 companions received the smallest punishments, but they still risked 20 years in prison. Allison was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison, while Jake received 50 years. He would also face federal accusations brought by the SEC, which would be resolved in federal court. Allison sobbed as she was escorted out of the courtroom, and Jake looked down in shame as he was taken away. Jake's prison sentence ended around 6 months later when he was discovered decapitated in the bathtub. A month after his sentencing, Mark was in his office going over some paperwork, having irritated the wrong people who didn't like his cocky attitude. When Marcia buzzed him on the intercom, "Mr. Hurley, there's a doctor, Kristen Marcus, here to see you." Mark was drawn to the last name. "Send her inside." The door opened, and Mark noticed a lovely blonde enter his office. Her hair fell below her shoulders, and she wore a skirt that came just below her knees. She smiled as she approached and extended her hand. "It's wonderful to finally meet you, Mr. Hurley." He shook her hand and asked her to sit. "Please call me Mark. Do you want something to drink? Coffee? Tea? Coffee would be great. Black, please. And call me Kristen." Mark requested Marcia to get them each a cup of coffee, then sat down as his assistant exited the office. "Marcus," Mark remarked this while glancing at her. "Are you related to Alan? Maybe it's his daughter." She grinned and shook her head. "No, I am his niece." "I see. I'm surprised we hadn't met before. I assumed I knew everyone in Alan's family. I've been quite busy. I was in France when Uncle Alan died and was unable to return for his burial." "So what can I do for you?" he asked. "I only wanted to meet the man who took down my dumb relative. I take it there is no love lost between you two." She shakes her head. "No, none," she replied gently. "I'm just relieved he's finally paying for his sins. I really apologize for what he did to you. From what I understand, you did not deserve any of it. And I apologize. My uncle told me a lot about you, so I see you are a doctor. Are you a medical doctor?" "No. I hold a PhD in business and economics. I teach at UCLA. My uncle and I had many interests, but I am more focused on academics. And no, I'm not interested in moving into the upper corner office." Mark laughed at this. They talked for a little more before she said she needed to get back to work. Mark did not want the talk to stop, and truthfully, he was interested in this woman. "Listen, Kristen, I would like to continue our topic over dinner. That is, if you don't mind being seen in public with a low-level MBA. She grinned, and her eyes glittered. "There is nothing lonely about being an MBA, and I would love to be seen with you in public. Dinner sounds fantastic. How about a Red Lobster tonight at 7 o'clock? She handed him a card that contained her phone number and address. "Red Lobster it is," Mark replied, taking the card from her. "I can pick you up at 630 if that works for you." "I will see you then." "Mark, it's been a pleasure meeting you," she said before leaving that evening. Kristen told Mark that Jake had tried to abuse her when she was just 18. She was ashamed and worried about being accused. She never said anything and avoided Alan and his family whenever possible. She also avoided interactions with men as a result of Jake's conduct and spent months in therapy while attending college. He told her about his interactions with Jake and what happened to Allison. Kristen was astonished, but not surprised. "I'm so sorry. You deserve so much better." Mark and Kristen dated for several months and fell in love. When he asked her to marry him, she practically tackled him to the floor and kissed him. "I take that as a yes." Mark wondered when she finally let him breathe. "No, that's a hell yes," she replied. "Now take me to bed and ravish me properly." "Yes, ma'am," Mark explained as he carried his bride upstairs. Yes, he believed things were going well. Thank you for listening to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, write a comment below with your thoughts on what transpired. Take care.